Welcome to our live coverage of the start of the Vendée Globe 2020. The start line is just off the coast of western France at Les Sables d'Olonne town you can see there. This morning, 33 skippers left the dock, their families and supporters, and in a few minutes, they are going to set off on one of the toughest sports events on the planet. Solo, unassisted, and non-stop around the globe, and won't cross the finish line back in this same spot until January. Vendée Globe superstars Dee Kafari and Mike Golding are with me and watching these scenes with some butterflies in their stomachs. And Mike, in our earlier programme, said, oh, do you know, I'm actually quite jealous now I'm seeing them set off. But it was a strange departure, much quieter than you'd normally expect because of lockdown in France. And there, the beaches that would normally be rammed packed with hundreds of thousands of people cheering the sailors on as they set off on this route around the globe. Dee.
So they leave France at Sables d'Olonne, as we just saw, and head down the Atlantic, missing the Canaries and the Cape Verdes down to the doldrums. Once they get across the doldrums, they have to negotiate the St. Helena High in the southern Atlantic, and then they head into the deep south. They turn left and they go under the Cape of Good Hope, keeping the Antarctic exclusion zone on their right. They work their way around the Southern Ocean until they leave the Southern Ocean at Cape Horn. Then they have 7,000 miles to the finish line. They head back up the Atlantic, back up the coast of South America, through the doldrums for the second time, and then they're fighting for that finish line back at the Sables d'Olonne in France, where they started.
Well, bright and early this morning, all 33 boats left the dock. Usually a maelstrom of noise and colour and thousands of fans, but this year COVID meant it was almost a quieter affair, but still the locals turned out with their pots and their pans to cheer on the skippers. 9 nations represented. That's Sam Davis of Great Britain. Alongside the French, she represents one of 4 British entries. There's a German, a Swiss, Japanese, Spanish, Italian, Finn, and a French-Australian as well. So this very French race is definitely growing its appeal globally, and these pictures are being beamed around the world to audiences thirsty for some live sport, and we are about to see the sport begin in well, just about half an hour's time from now off this west coast. So Mike Golding, let's bring you in, and just how did you feel watching these scenes earlier on this morning?
Well, given we're all in lockdown here in the UK and of course France, I can't help feeling a little bit envious, as you mentioned, of these guys disappearing off for the next 2 to 3 months to sail solo around the planet. It's an extraordinary feeling. Emotions, you could almost feel it from here. You could see on everyone's faces how much it meant to them to be there at the start of the Vendée Globe. Of course, you're saying goodbye to family and your team, and it's even the hardest hearts will get a little bit emotional about the start of this race. It is the most extraordinary event, has the most extraordinary followership, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them all sailing.
Well, here we are live on the water. Jean Le Cam, 61 years old, the oldest competitor. And we're getting shots from on board Armel Tripon's boat, L'Occitane en Provence. And conditions out on the water seem quite different, actually, from the conditions ashore, where the sun was shining and it was a glorious day.
You can see on those images that we saw, it was quite cloudy to start with, but that sun has burnt through on shore where it's slightly warmer. I think the temperature of the sea there is an indication of the difference, keeping that cloud formation there. The breeze is coming from the south southerly direction, so hopefully that cloud, although we're hoping it just warms up a little bit more, so it starts to burn off that cloud, so we get a really nice vision of all the boats as they set off. They're all going to be heading in a westerly direction, given the wind direction and the strategy with the weather. But you can see it's quite cloudy. So there's a massive temperature difference between where they were on the dockside and now when they're out there. There's a lot of people with some woolly hats on, but there is some breeze, and the new boats with the new foils only need 12 knots to get up on their foils. So we're going to see some pretty good starts, I think.
I really hope this this mist kind of burns off, but it actually looks like it's got worse since we first started looking at the boats.
Yeah, about an hour ago, it looked like it was lifting and the sun was burning off. And
well, look at that. That's the beach. It looks perfectly clear and perfect condition. So these guys are only about a mile and a half, 2 miles offshore, and yet, as they said, you know, the difference in water temperature and air temperature is causing that mist to just linger about, and the only thing that's going to burn it off is the sun. But that's a pretty big bank of mist. I'd call that fog, actually.
Well, it's also an indication, as you said earlier, that there's weather out to the west, and they're all heading that direction because there is a small depression out there that they're trying to get the other side of the front so that they get a wind shift. So they're all going to head out that way. They should get that wind shift, and then they can tack southerly until the next depression that comes through on Tuesday with a bit more of a bit more grunt to it. So they're probably going to see the wind increase from the 10 to 15 knots that they see at the start here up to about 20, 25 knots. They'll get through to some lighter winds the other side as they go south, and then that next depression that they're looking at for Tuesday is the one with a punch of up to maybe 40 knots. There's quite a distinct wind shift in there, which normally indicates some pretty gusty conditions.
I think what we're seeing here is less than what was forecast, and it looks much softer. I mean, of course, these boats aren't winding themselves up right now, but it just doesn't look pressed out there at all. It looks very flat, and in the areas that are covered with mist, it actually looks even quieter. It looks like there's even less breeze right shore into the shaded area. Oh, there you go. Maybe
well, very, very different conditions depending where you are on the water, isn't it?
That doesn't look too bad, but...
So, if you just tuned in and you're thinking, isn't this a solo race? Yes, it is. And some of the crew, or all the crew, will disembark at some point before the start. They have to. Their ribs, their motorboats are following them to the start line. But they're basically helping the skippers, aren't they? Just so that helping them with the technical side of things, helping them set up, and also helping them save a bit of energy.
That's right. So each skipper left the dock, and they had 4 crew members on board that were part of their COVID-tested bubble. And they have 2 ribs. So one rib will probably have some of the team support, maybe the sponsor that was been permitted down there. The other rib is standing by ready to collect those 4 crew members that are on the boat. And their job really was to look after the boat while the skipper was looking at weather and navigation, maybe having a little rest, eating and drinking before the start sequence. And they're the ones that have hoisted all the sails. So they're the ones that have put the grunt in, letting the skipper relax as much as possible, because at the 4-minute gun, those crew have to be off the boat, and then it's all up to the skipper until they cover 25,000 miles.
And of course, given the weather, they're probably having a last look at the most recent weather information and trying to work out what's happening here and what this cloud coverage means. What it might mean in terms of wind speed, but wind directions. And that will be, the whole discussion going on board now will be about where's best to be on the line, how to approach the line. Different people have different strategies, but everyone's looking for a safe start. But at the same time, they all want to do a good job of it. They'll all want to be there in the game. So they're trying to tie down all these details, and then coming up within the next 15 minutes or so, they'll start to look at sealing the engines, sealing the propeller shafts, and making the boats race ready. And that has to be done before the shore crew leave. The shore crew leave the boat with a photograph of the seal in place on the
seal on the engine.
Yeah, there's a seal placed on the shaft at the end. And that prevents the engine being used to drive during the rain.
course est là une puissance sur moi où c'est comme une drogue, on a envie de tourner. Même si on a déjà fait et fait bien, et ça donne toujours envie de revenir et faire mieux et découvrir autre chose.
Comme le laisse deviner son accent, Sam Davis est anglaise et elle aime tellement le Vendée Globe qu'elle va y participer une 3e fois. Question, le Vendée Globe l'a-t-elle changé ?
Le Vendée Globe ne m'a pas changé. Par contre, le Vendée Globe m'a donné confiance que je suis capable de faire beaucoup plus que j'avais imaginé. J'ai beaucoup appris sur moi-même. D'avoir fini le Vendée Globe, je me suis fait la preuve moi-même que je pouvais même gagner le Vendée Globe.
4e en 2008, Sam revient sur l'épreuve avec un projet ambitieux, aux côtés de 5 autres concurrentes. Pour mémoire, il n'y en avait aucune en 2016.
Dans l'histoire de la course, on n'est que 6 femmes qui ont fini le Vendée Globe. Et là, en 2020, il y a le potentiel de doubler le nombre de femmes d'avoir fini le Vendée Globe. Ça, c'est pas rien.
Dans le contexte de crise sanitaire qu'on connaît, c'est un Vendée Globe déjà très particulier que Sam Davis s'apprête à vivre, mais la particularité ne s'arrête pas là.
Je me retrouve concurrent avec mon compagnon Romain. Et on est le premier couple de faire le Vendée Globe, mais on est déjà en fait le premier couple d'avoir fini le Vendée Globe nous deux. Et c'est juste pas bonheur quand on se retrouve nous deux, chacun son projet, chacun son bateau, on peut nous deux partir. Parce que c'est un peu chaque fois, c'est le rêve de nous deux d'avoir un projet Vendée Globe.
La petite Anglaise, hugely experienced, doing her 3rd Vendée, as she said in that clip. Her boat, though, is kind of middle of the range, isn't it? It's 2010, so it's not one of the newest, and it's by no means one of the oldest. What are her chances?
Well, I think she's got every opportunity to be a podium boat and definitely can't be ruled out. She's probably the most tweaked, modified boat there is. And she's always been nipping on the heels of the podium in all the racing she's done, as she's gone step by step through a very logical and scientific process of improving the technology, choice of foils, reinforcement for the delamination that she had early on in one of her races, and just learning how to get the best out of her boat and her autopilot. Her confidence is super high. And her comment after the Vendée Arctique when she finished 4th against all those new boats that are out there was, I'm just not sure if I can sustain it for 70 days, but if anyone can, then Sam knows she can, and she knows how to push it. She's been round on Royal Sun Alliance with the Jules Verne, she's been round with the Volvo Ocean Race, she's been round, started 3 Vendées, well, this is the 3rd one. So she knows what success is like, and I think she's pretty driven and determined.
Yeah, it can't be underestimated. 3 Vendées, so it's only 6 women haven't completed the Vendée Globe, and now she's done 3 races herself, or competed in 3 races. And as you say, I was going to say myself, she's got a track record, an enviable track record of successful projects. So, and while that boat is 2010, it's got some of the most advanced foils and biggest foils. I mean, they're very big foils. But with big foils comes more risk in terms of collisions and impact. But I do think Sam is all ready to pick up a podium if there's a lot of fallout amongst the faster, newer generation boats. Sam will be the first one there.
You're right, and she's spent a lot of time in those modifications of modifying the boat for the way she sails. So she's got a slightly smaller rig than some of the others, but her foils are massive, so hence she can take that weight out. It's reduced her keel weight, and she's actually made her J2 and J3, so her head sail slightly smaller, which actually suits the way she sails. So she's got real good confidence. She'll be one to get multiple sails up as soon as she can. This is a reaching start, so what we're going to see is a lot of triple heading, so 3 sails up there to get maximum sail area to get going. And she's worked really hard with the autopilot technology as well. So really started at the beginning of that technology that has now trickled down to some of the other boats.
We're going on board with some of the skippers, and what we're seeing are these cockpits that are always constantly being developed and getting more high tech, and it's almost got to the point where, well, certainly with the newer boats, they don't even have to step out into their oilskins into the wet for the long periods of time that they used to have to do that. And it comes down. Alex Thompson was saying recently that, you know, if you're absolutely mentally fatigued and you can't think straight, then you're no good to anyone. So what is the harm in building yourself a nice, comfortable, warm cockpit? And that kind of makes sense. And I just wonder, Mike, you know, why didn't someone come up with that great idea earlier?
Well, to be honest, it had been muted earlier. I mean, the reality is that the problem wasn't quite the same problem when the boats were doing 20 knots and when we were limited to 20 knots. I mean, yes, there was a lot of water on deck, and we did build sort of small cuddies, but no one had ever thought to try and, well, a few people were exploring the idea of actually fully enclosing the boat. But there are problems with it, as we discussed earlier. 3 o'clock in the morning, pouring with rain, 35 knot breeze, you're dropping a reef in, and the reef pennant invariably hooks around the end of the boom. If you're down below, like on Alex's boat, you're not necessarily going to know. You're just going to pull a reef line in until the mark doesn't appear, and then you're going to have to go out, put your head out the hatch, figure out what's happened, put your head back down the hatch, release the jammer, go back on the deck, untangle it, and then get back down below. It's going to be a lot of messing around. So some of those transitions for these boats that are operating from the inside could be incredibly difficult. Having said that, when Alex's boat is doing 30 knots, he's going to be very happy to be safely tucked down below. And don't kid yourself, that is not a cockpit he has. He is inside the boat. He is not in a cockpit as such. All the lines are brought in through special channels that allow any water that comes in with them to drain out through the keel rods. It's all very cleverly orchestrated, and it means he's surrounded by cameras. He has a visual, of course, but he's surrounded by cameras. He can see all sorts of different aspects of the boat. He can see the sail trim and so on, and he can make adjustments. But, you know, I have to think of the day that I was in the Southern Ocean piling down a wave when my nice, sophisticated lithium-ion battery system decided it was going to switch itself off, and every single system on the boat just powered down, and I was left with nothing. No matter how good your boat is, it's prone to the normal things that all boats are prone to, and eventually that sort of thing can happen. And what was problematical for me would be absolutely catastrophic for Alex, because his boat is so reliant on all these systems.
Yeah, well, let's have a look at this boat, because it is state of the art. We've seen lots of pictures and video of it over recent months. It had a catastrophic Jules Verne earlier in the year that ended up seeing it back in the boatyard, effectively being rebuilt. So he hasn't had that much time on there, but it is so high tech. Well, apart from the cockpit, he's got cameras all around. It's very aerodynamic, it's very rounded, it's unpainted. Apparently the logo is carbon fibre that's been moulded into that shape. So it really is state of the art. Does that make it more fragile?
The most extreme of the new design, and it started from when he finished the last Vendée Globe on the podium in second place. Everything, the thought process around this boat is for how he sails, and it's just a whole different way of sailing. As Mike said, with all the fibre optics and the data coming in, it's all on screens, and all the thresholds are there, and alarms go off, and the sensors on all the deformation of the coils, the slamming effect on the hull, the loads on the rig, even the rudders. It's a whole different way of sailing with numbers, but ultimately there's going to have to be that balance with actual feel for the sailing that Mike was talking about, where it's about getting the boat round and managing it. And when you rely on the technology too hard, the opposite is hard to do. But he's gone for the enclosed cockpit, and I think I like the balance. Yes, I like the safety aspect of that, but that balance where there's some cockpits that you can choose to be open or closed. So you have that option. mean, we're talking about 30 boat speed and extreme weather, but you've got to spend some time going through the lighter stuff as well. When it's hot, when you're in a carbon fibre oven, basically.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult at times, and you know, there's no doubt about it. We have every extreme. Alex is definitely at one end of the extreme where he's fully inside the boat, but right the way back to boats that are 20 years old where you're fully outside. I mean, when we used to do this, we used to say, well, you're either inside, in which case you take your paddles off, or you're outside, in which case you wear your paddles. So we're in the middle of that now.
Now, by my estimation, they've delayed the start a bit because that clock in the top left corner has gone up. We were expecting the start in about 12 minutes from now. It's now about half an hour from now. So we'll try and get some clarity on that. We'll let you know right after this.
On a 9 pages, par exemple, voilà, on a 9 pages de contrôle à faire au niveau sécurité du bateau, mais également sécurité du skipper. Le skipper part pas tant que toutes les cases ne sont pas cochées.
Oui, c'est un moment important parce que, mine de rien, une liste de sécurité pour partir sur un Vendée Globe, c'est pas quelque chose d'anodin. Là, c'est juste le petit check-up, voir que tout est en règle.
Tu mets un gilet de tout le temps.
Dès que je sors, je mets mon gilet. Je le laisse tout le temps en fait devant la porte là.
D'accord.
Voilà.
Tu le mets ou pas ton casque?
Non, je le mets que pour monter au mât.
Celui-là il est bien, j'ai regardé, on a différentes normes, tu vois, qu'on accepte, et celui-là il est bon.
Le bateau aujourd'hui est quand même plutôt bien fiabilisé, et plutôt bien prêt. Vu le timing qu'on avait au début il y a quelques mois, on est assez fiers quoi.
Well, safety always paramount on these boats, and those safety designs and techniques have obviously evolved a lot over the years.
I mean, you carry your life jacket, and there's that whole discussion when you're solo. If you have a life jacket on, if you go over the side, your boat's not going to come back on its own and come and pick you up. So do you want to be floating as your boat sails away from you? So the fundamental part of your life jacket is your tether and actually being attached to the boat. Otherwise, you're useless on a solo race. But the interesting thing, I think, now is the discussion where they use the protective clothing actually inside the boat because of the violent motion of these new boats as they decelerate with the foils from flying to hitting the water. They're talking not just about helmets to go up the rig and check things with some body armour, but they're actually talking about when down below, if they're moving around the boat inside, they're putting a helmet on and body armour. And that's the difference between the new generation boats and the older generation boats where they're just talking life jackets on deck. And down below they're pretty comfortable moving around. And that's the differential in the boat speeds between the boats. 5 knots is an awful lot if you're going at 20 knots or 25 knots.
So a 20-minute delay to the departure. Why do you think that might be, Mike?
I think it's almost certainly due to visibility. I think there is poor visibility beyond the racecourse, and I think these boats are staying closer to the shore, probably away from the... It seems like once you go past the start line, you go into an area of very low visibility. That's not good from a safety point of view. It's fishing boats still operating out there and other traffic. But it's also not good from the point of view of watching the start, which, you know, we don't want to see the go-go and them all disappear into a bank of fog, and that's the end of that.
I'd anticipate as well that line of cloud is going to have a wind shift in it. So you could start in one type of wind and actually go into the cloud and get very different conditions, which isn't really ideal to start.
Sebastian Simon on Arkea Paprec, and very nice looking boat. So let's talk about these different generations of boats, and the foils especially, because we've got very different foils. I mean, do we know how the newer ones are going to actually perform?
I think the early foils were quite tentative, you know, so the boats with the smaller foils, in other words, they weren't sure of how well the system would work, and so the early design, the Generation 1 foils, were kind of just exploring the way. And once they realised that the boat's so much quicker than these foils, the obvious evolution was to make them bigger. And Generation 2 and Generation 3 have steadily got bigger and bigger. You know what foiling a mocker is now? It's trimaran. but without floats. It's just the main hull basically keeps the boat up, and the foils are acting like floats, and so you're generating a lot of power. And the big problem has been that the one design rule, which means that these boats have one design rigs, one design rigging, one design keel arrangements, also means that they are limited by the strength of their mast. And because they can create so much righting moment with these foils, they've been quite tentative about how big those foils get. They're now pretty big, and they are pushing the boundaries, and that's why these boats all have these data streams telling them when they're exceeding rigging loads.
So that's by design. The rig is actually, although it's one design, is actually the weak link.
It's the weak link. Yeah, it's the weak link. So
that's your kind of guiding parameter of how much power you can have. And the new generation foils, now with the rotation, they can rotate 5 degrees, which has allowed them to have the performance upwind. So you're seeing them foiling much better upwind, which they didn't have before. In the last edition of the race, we had 8 foiling boats. It was just a downwind advantage. Now we've got downwind reaching and upwind for a lot of these boats.
Yeah, I mean, someone's told me reliably that some of these French boats are now going upwind at in excess of 20 knots. So, which, you know, I don't know what angles they're sailing. They're presumably having to do a lot of miles through the water, but if it's working on VMG, they're probably VMGing at 13, 14 knots. And that you cannot do that with a conventional setup. So, you know, there's going to be a big difference, and that's where could be a big split quite early on between those boats that foil very well upwind and those like Alex's boat, more optimised for downwind. I mean, the Vendée Globe is a downwind race by and large, and I don't think Alex's choice is wrong, because most of the race is run downwind. However, from Cape Horn, travelling the 7,000 miles back north, you could get left with a very long beam. And they've always said with the Vendée that you have to just be in touch at Cape Horn. And if you're in touch at Cape Horn, the race is yours for the taking if you can sell that last part well. What in touch means in this new generation, I just don't know. I mean, does in touch mean 200 miles?
Well,
I think it probably does.
They're talking now with the new generation about 600-mile days in the right conditions. So suddenly that in touch has changed a great deal.
Well, in 2004, in the South Atlantic, I was 800 miles behind the lead group. And I always remember doing an interview with a French journalist who said basically, not happy all those 8 months. So you never quite, there's no such thing as being out of touch. Not until the finish line's crossed, and then you have touch.
But the two distinct shapes we're seeing with the foils are basically the C shape and the L shape. So those that come out the side, and they actually have the leeward foil in the water creating lid, but the windward foil stays out as well to help put weight on the high side and balance the boat. So they're out pretty much permanently. The C shape foils on Hugo Boss, Aquitaine, Coron, and Archaea Paprec, they're the retractable ones, so they have the ability to get rid of them. So in the lighter airs, when we're trying to reduce the wetted area and reduce drag, they're going to have a slight advantage in those conditions.
Aquitaine's really quite interesting because it's not a straightforward C shape. There's a reverse shin in the foil, which means that as the board is withdrawn, it actually lifts the C section, the section that's lifting the platform up. It lifts it out of the water. So I think it's probably the most extreme, but it's a San Manuel design now. Everything about it, I just like the way the boat looks. I mean, I wish it had more time on the water, because I'm pretty sure when they get that boat developed, it will be a rocket ship. Well, it is a rocket ship.
Well, and a designer for the future for this class of boat, if he gets it right. But the foils we've seen developed even in the recent weeks, because they've put fences on them to stop the flow or laminar flow, and putting guards on them as well.
Well, one of the latest models of foil is on Archaea Paprec, sailed by Sebastian Simon, who said, though, that he hasn't spent much time in big breeze in the boat. So we'll have to see how that one pans out when he hits the Southern Ocean.
Avec Sébastien Simon, nous avions prévu d'aborder un certain nombre de sujets, mais de là à parler chiffon...
Chiffon, tu viens là. Allez, coucher. Tu bouges pas.
Sébastien Simon sait ce qu'il veut, et depuis un bon bout de temps, ce qu'il veut, c'est courir le Vendée Globe.
Mon père et ma grand-mère habitent en face du ponton Vendée Globe. Je crois que ma grand-mère, il n'y a pas plus près que le ponton Vendée Globe. Donc le Vendée Globe, c'est une course qui m'a toujours fait rêver. Elle est quasiment née en même temps que moi, hein, en 89-90. Et moi, je suis de 1990. Et mon père était passionné de course au large, de voile, etc. Et en fait, donc, c'était assez facile pour moi de suivre les départs et les arrivées.
Sa victoire lors de la solitaire du Figaro 2018 a permis à Sébastien de se projeter sur la course de ses rêves. Impossible pour ce compétiteur dans l'âme de ne pas jouer les premiers rôles, alors il a fait construire un bateau, et bien évidemment, c'est un foiler.
C'est des bateaux qui sont réellement semi-volants autour de la planète. C'est vraiment des bateaux qui sont innovants et technologiques. C'est très proche de la Formule 1 aujourd'hui. Moi, je suis hyper heureux de faire partie de cette génération de nouveaux bateaux et j'espère que ça ira, peut-être pas tout de suite, mais j'espère que ça ira encore plus loin. On a des monocoques de 18 mètres de long, on est en train de rattraper les multicoques des années 2000. En termes de performance, c'est incroyable.
Une préparation semée d'embûches, entre crise sanitaire et gros problèmes de foil, aurait pu entamer sa motivation.
J'ai besoin de me prouver à moi-même que je vais y arriver. Ouais, j'espère ne pas décevoir, j'espère aller au bout des choses. J'ai envie de dire presque quel que soit le résultat. Je ferai le maximum, je ne lâcherai rien. Clairement, avant tout, j'ai besoin de me prouver à moi-même et que j'en suis capable, que je ne suis pas là par hasard.
So we're about 20 minutes away from the start of the Vendée Globe 2020. It's been delayed by 20 minutes because of the conditions and the fog, but we think that's lifting now, so we're looking good for a start. Now, Sébastien Simon there talking about his boat and you know, life on the ocean wave, but these foils that we were discussing earlier, how do we know how they're going to react, you know, when they hit the Southern Ocean, when they hit those strong winds?
Depending on what they hit. I mean, Sébastien Simon over 2 years has broken 3 foils and only had his latest one delivered whilst in the Sable d'Olonne in the last 3 weeks.
Well, the thing I was going to revert back to is I recorded a discussion with Arnaud Priche about how he coped in the Southern Ocean with the boat surfing on waves. He said for the majority of the time he didn't foil. Now, of course, these boats with the even bigger foils where and only 7 sails, you're never going to be in the right setup. When you get onto a wave, you're going to go surfing off at very high speed, and then the next minute you're going to be between waves and trying to not have enough sail. So you're going to have to find a happy compromise where the boat will maintain a steady speed. And that's going to be very interesting to watch because all the teams have had to make choices. We talked about the sail restrictions, 7 sails, and using some of these small sails, the storm sail, the 8th sail, as an option. And I think that it's going to be very interesting to see how that works with this. The reason it works at all, of course, is back to the autopilot. We haven't actually thought much about it, but the autopilot technology has come on a huge amount, and I believe the boats are now being steered faster by their autopilots than most helmsmen can drive the boats. Sam's done a lot of work on that. Sam's done a hell of a lot of work on this and created, you know, pilots that have a lot more knowledge than just pushing the helm left and right.
Yeah, I think it's based more on the sensors that do all modes of movement, whether it's the yaw, the pitch, and the swerving, so that it's all about the inertia, which is obviously the foils of the deceleration as well. So I think they're looking at trying to anticipate what the skipper normally feels when they're driving, so they're much more responsive. But getting confidence in your pilot and the setup takes miles and time at sea, which some of these boats and sailors haven't had, so they've tried to cram it in, but none of them have taken them down in the south. So it is that unknown entity to a certain level.
I think the reason why you talk about the south is that once you get into the south, the wave pattern, no matter what the weather, even in calmer conditions, the wave pattern is much more consistent and longer. And so it's hard. In a way, it's easier to keep the boat surfing, but with these very high-speed boats, it's going to be interesting to see how they cope with it.
Now, if you're wondering why the crews are still on board, it's because the race has been delayed a further 20 minutes. So the new start time is 13:42 French time. That's 12:42 GMT. Well, that's a commentator's curse for you, isn't it? I was saying it was just beginning to pick up and look optimistic. So we're still 36 minutes or so away from the start. We've talked a lot about the foils and the boats and so on, but I'm also interested in the men and women on those boats. Now, someone like Thomas Rouillon is part of a sleep study. I know Pip Hare of Great Britain, she's also helping research sleep and mental health on board. And I think with these COVID times and lockdowns and so on, this research, which has been going on within the Vendée Globe race for many years, but it's now far more immediate, it's far more urgent. So Dee, as part of your lockdown, I know you were doing sort of virtual conferences about mental health when you are alone and you're locked away. How do these people on these boats, how do these skippers cope?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, this is the ultimate in self-isolation, but it's through choice. It hasn't been enforced on them. And I think that's the big difference that we struggled with at home when we got locked down. We didn't choose to be locked into our houses, but these guys have chosen to be on their boats for 25,000 miles. And that's a big difference, but it's all about routine. And they are now looking at monitoring not only the data sensor that's coming in from the fibre optics on the boat and different sensors around, but also on them. So they are looking at how many calories they've burnt, how many minutes they've been asleep for, what their mental alertness is like, because unless they can perform at the optimal decision-making capabilities and physical capabilities, the boat can be as technical as it likes, but without the driver on board, it's kind of for no good. So the sleep surveys, and I know Alex Thompson has got on his hub all his data, all his, like how he's reacting to things available for people to watch as well. So you can actually see how much sleep these people are getting and how hard they're having to work. And that's been right down to nutrition levels, hydration levels, sleep amounts. All of this needs to be considered so that they can just maintain this status quo and this ability to perform, because this isn't a 15-minute Olympic race. This is 2 to 3 months marathon that they still have to push as hard at the end. I mean, if we look back to the last edition, that was a boat-on-boat battle. And even the edition before that with Francois Gabard and Armel Kirsch, that was a match race all the way around the world.
Yeah, from about halfway, wasn't it?
So the level is, just so intense for this period of time that you just can't afford to let any of your mental systems down. You still got to be able to make that decision when you look at that weather, understand what it says, make the right decision, make the right tactical call, and get your boat on the optimum numbers, which is why they're absorbing all this data in this forever moving world, trying to get to the limits and not exceed those thresholds.
I think we're seeing some of the crews now getting off the boats. But how do you cope? I mean, what are the lessons? For those who are self-isolating at the moment, what can we take away from the experiences of past Vendée Globe sailors and their experiments on board?
I think it's really important to have a routine, to have a focus, so have an objective for the day or the week, and to have some kind of order in getting things achieved. So you feel that sense of achievement each day. So you don't wake up kind of lost in I don't know what to do today, but you have a plan in place. And that's just as important to make sure that you plan your eating and your drinking so that you try and stay as you look after your well-being, and it's not succumbing to the naughty things, but actually the things that are going to keep you healthy and mentally alert as well. And making sure you connect. This is isolation, but these people will speak to their loved ones, will speak to their teams, they'll speak to each other. They have the ability to use WhatsApp between the boats. So they're sending each other messages and having that interaction, even though you're not physically seeing somebody face to face. is just as important. That's still just as important to us at home as well.
And I imagine that's not something you had, Mike, you know, in your earliest Vendée Globes.
Funnily enough, even in '98, we did a sleep science study with NASA. So even back then, we were working on a sleep, and as a result of that, I wore a little electrograph on my wrist, and the boat had a little sensor on board, and they used to take the data and analyse it afterwards. And I picked that up as a result of Ellen. Actually, Ellen was doing it as well, and I got in touch with the same people, and both Ellen and I bought exactographs actually in 1998, and we ran that. And almost immediately, the sleep scientists were able to tell me that I needed to modify my sleep profile. I immediately did it.
And did you notice?
Yes.
Wow.
It made a massive difference, you know, just by modifying the periods of sleep to optimize waking on at the top of a circadian cycle, not at the bottom of one, you know, so it made an enormous difference. And not only that, it shortened the amount of sleep time, which meant that if you sleep for shorter and shorter periods, the boat will maintain a higher performance, because every time you wake, you trim the boat up to maximum performance. Every time you sleep, the boat's performance diminishes progressively. So being awake, doing lots of little short naps is the way to make the boat perform at its very best. You know, if you just said, oh, I'm going to sail a boat maximum for 8 hours and I'll sleep for 8 hours, well, honestly, you'd be gone. You know, everyone who's sleeping short.
And I think there's that fear when you're sleeping that not only are you not performing at 100%, but it's that fear of potentially hitting something or something going wrong. And I know there's some really interesting technology on the fleet for this edition because of that fear with the foil sticking out that you're going to hit something. And we always talk about our unidentified floating objects, our UFOs out there. But there's 2 schools of technology that have come out, and 18 of the 33 boats have what's called an Oscar, which is a thermal imaging camera at the top of the rig that can detect objects in the water up to 600 meters away. Now, obviously, when you're traveling at 30 knots, that's going to close quite quickly, but there's a chance that you're going to see it. And some of the fleet have also got pingers, which are built into the keel, the bulb of their keel, which will send out a metallic noise that hopefully will get any potential hazard out of the way.
That's taken a while to develop, because I remember doing a piece on that with the Volvo Ocean Race back in, 2008, and visiting a company in the States that were trying to develop it. Well, I think 3 of the boats have got those on board at the moment. So that's good news for the whales, and good news for the sailors as well. And also
the reason why that technology is not used more often is because these boats are so semi-displacement, they're nearly not in the water. Even the non-foilers are so semi-displacement. So the sonars historically have been too close to the sea surface for them to, any bubbles in front of the sonar will act as if it is a whale or an object. The ones that they're using here, I think, are more focused on trying to alert a sleeping whale or an unaware whale that you're approaching, and hopefully they get themselves out of the way. I think it's a distraction.
To stop the impact of it, because it's normally damage or injury that is the showstopper. So I think it's definitely the right one.
What's it called again?
Oscar.
The system on the Mars, I think, has said there are quite a few boats with that.
18 of the 33.
So, let's see how that pans out.
But that's not much of a margin for error, though, is it? I mean, it's getting a bigger and bigger problem, isn't it? The UFOs, the unidentified floating objects. I'm not sure what the solution is, other than technology, or completely changing our sort of cargo industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a battle that's been going on in years, and we've seen the attrition rate due to a lot of damage by these unidentified floating objects. But it goes to show that synergy of technology and AI that's coming together with our sport, which shows how big the innovation is and how groundbreaking it can be. And if we can make it work in an environment like this, it does trickle down in the industry.
The reason it seems to have gone worse is there's lots of reasons, but one of the reasons is you're going so much faster. So any impact has much larger impact than it would have when the boats were going, 60% of the current speed. So that's made a big difference. But some of, in terms of Wales, which is an area which the sport is trying to tackle quite heavily, some of that is due to the success of the whales not being fished out.
Okay, well, Giancarlo Pedotta is sailing on Prismian Group, and he's one of only 5 Italians to have ever raced in the Vendée Globe. Let's find out about him.
Intenso, magico, imprevedibile.
Le Vendée Globe, réduit à sa plus simple expression avec les mots de Giancarlo Pedotti, concurrent italien natif de Florence, découvert lors de la Mini Transat 2009, en quête de son premier tour du monde.
L'idée de faire un Vendée Globe, pour moi, c'est un rêve que tu commences à avoir quand tu découvres la course au large. Bien évidemment, rêver, c'est facile, c'est gratuit. Après, par contre, il faut franchir une barrière. Et moi, je pense qu'après les 2014, j'ai senti que j'avais vraiment franchi un cap et que cette rêve-là, c'était pas quelque chose que j'ai gardé dans un tiroir, mais quelque chose qu'à un moment donné, je pouvais arriver à toucher avec mes mains.
Giancarlo est le 5e skipper italien à prendre part à l'épreuve. Sans faire de bruit, entre Mini Transat, Route du Rhum et Transat Jacques Vabre, il a tracé son bonhomme de sillage dans la course océanique. À bientôt 45 ans, il est à un tournant de sa carrière.
Je pense que là, c'est le moment un peu où toutes les choses que j'ai fait avant, ils vont être dans la même boîte. La partie du sport, de l'engagement personnel, de la performance, de chercher d'être meilleur chaque jour, chaque minute même, je dirais. La partie aussi liée à mes études de philosophie où, mine de rien, la journée elle est longue, les bords il est long, et donc tu peux réfléchir un peu à ta vie, regarder toutes les étapes. Je trouve que tout ça se mélange dans ces courses-là, ou dans tous les cas, j'imagine, parce que ça va être très long. Je pense que plus que chercher, tout ça va se donner tout seul, quoi.
Et à la question de savoir à quoi ressemblerait un Vendée Globe à la hauteur de ses ambitions,
l'idée, c'est de me centrer vraiment sur faire le mieux dans chaque situation que je puisse rencontrer. Ça, c'est mon objectif dans les Vendée Globe.
A big emotional goodbye from Giancarlo to his family earlier on, as we saw the boats leaving Les Sables d'Olonne. That gives you a real perspective, actually, that shot of just how big these boats are, because you kind of, when you see them close up, you just don't get it. But the upwind sail area is 300 square meters. That's slightly bigger than a tennis court, and that is huge, isn't it? Huge to control. Dee's just raised an eyebrow as if to say, well, not really. But it would be daunting for us mere mortals to think about that. And the downwind area is double that. So really huge boats to control. But the other thing about them is, we've spoken already about how every team has some sort of mission, some sort of charity that they're following. And one thing that a lot of them are trying to do is raise awareness about environmental issues. But they're also putting their money where their mouths are, because there's a lot of, let's say, green technology on board. Hydrogeneration, there's solar panels. Hugo Boss, for example, with Alex Thompson, we saw that. You can't see them because they're black like the hull, but he's got a huge number of solar panels.
19 square meters of solar panels. It's the most ever seen on one of these boats. is quite impressive. And he's done a big...
That's more impressive for you than the size of his sail.
Yeah. You can keep your foils in your sails, guys. I was really impressed that he really has gone for the solar panels, and they've improved technology in this area so much. So people have got much more confidence. And the hydro generators that all the boats have got fitted are normally Watt and Sea, which is actually Yannick Westervan, who's on Matricop. It's his company. And he's developing the hydro generator that can also be a wind generator. He's got that on his boat. So obviously he's testing his prototype on his boat, which is fair enough. But it goes to show that there are so many alternatives out there. And I think Conrad Coleman in the last edition of the race proved that you can go around fossil fuel free. So there's a number of electric engines, and these concepts are there, but it's just the confidence. But the more we can save fuel means they're carrying less weight. So the sailors are happier with that. So it's just getting the confidence in the gear.
I think like we're seeing with cars, you know, where we all used to think an electric car was a milk float, they're clearly not milk floats. And when we were with both Ecover and Gamesa, our push was always to find the most efficient, the fastest way. And the fastest way is often the most sustainable way. The way of going around with carrying the least fuel possible. And that means good battery technology to make sure, and good methods of creating energy onto the boat. I mean, Alex has got an electric propulsion system which is designed to also be a hydro generation system, which I don't think they're allowed to use, in fact, because to make that work, they had to spin the propeller. And as we've already discussed this morning, the propeller's shafts are locked, but he needed to spin it in the right direction to initiate the clock to work, but they weren't allowed to do that under the rule, which is kind of a shame because it's an innovation that really we need in the sport. And IMOCA and this race in particular is a seeding ground for new technology that does filter down into the mainstream yachting community, but more than that, it filters down into other areas. And you know, we're increasing it. There is no reason why a sailboat should have a stinky diesel engine down the road, and absolutely all sailboats should be going in there on electric engines. The reason it's not mandatory on these boats is because of the requirement for a certain degree of safety, and that requires these boats to be able to motor for a minimum of 5 hours, which, to be honest, I think it's a minimum. That's a minimum requirement.
So they have 2 tests to do, and they have to have a thrust test with their engine of a horsepower, and they also need to motor at 5 knots for the 5 hours.
Yeah. And so that's a huge requirement, which requires a lot of batteries or some sort of generation system that can keep up with the drive system. So and I think you know, hydrogen, for instance, is a way that you could potentially do it without fossil fuels. But so all these things, this is a proving ground for it. If it works on the Vendée Globe, it will work in real life because that was no harsher testing ground.
There's an iconic shot from Le Sable d'Olonne. It's postcards, if ever you saw one, isn't it? But it also belies the conditions out on the water, which is why we've got a further delay to the start. So we're now approaching a 1 hour delay. So we're hoping to get underway at 1300 GMT. So we've seen the start time slip 3 times so far. So fingers crossed we get away in about 40 minutes from now.
To be quite honest, each time we look, the weather is improving, and I think that's probably what the race committee are seeing. They're seeing there is signs of continual improvement. The breeze is a bit more stable. There's less mist around. And I think they're thinking that if they wait another 35 minutes, then they'll have a perfect Vendée Globe start. Whereas if they go up now, there's a risk that the boats do disappear into some poor visibility. Even there, that shot's it's a lot clearer.
So I think as a class with IMOCA, talking of the alternative fuel sources that we were just covering there, they've got a massive commitment to the environment and ocean health because they're working with the IOC, UNESCO, have signed up to agree to make a difference. And given that the ocean's the playground and the office for these guys for the next few months, there's some really interesting innovations that people are applying the science to our sport, which is quite exciting because we're going to places, or they're going to places that most people never get to go. Scientists don't get to go to the middle of an ocean very often without huge expense. And some of the boats have really taken this on board. So we've got 3 of the fleet, Louis Burton, Boris Herman and Alexia Barrier, that are going to deploy Argo floats around the world. And they've all been given a position of where they're going to deploy their floats. And they're coming in from to give the weather reports back in. And then there's also 10 boats carrying weather buoys that are going to be deployed. So Miranda Merin, Manuel Cousin, Roman Antanasio, Damien Seguin, Maxime Sorrel, Stéphane de Raison, Benjamin Detreux, Alexia Barrier, Ari Husela and Pip Hare are all carrying a weather buoy that they have to deploy at a certain location. And that then gives, as soon as it hits the water, it gives instant information back to the weather sources so they can get more accurate forecasts. And we've said that over the years, the weather information that these guys are getting is so much more accurate. And that's because this kind of data is going out there and being collected. And on top of that, we've got 2 guys, Boris Herman and Fabrice Amadeo, have got machines on board at the cost of 50 kilos, which is a lot when you're putting a race program together, to do the testing of the water. So looking at salinity, temperature, pH levels, and microplastics. So they've really committed to it. And I think Alexia is even collecting water samples, which is massive commitment because she's got to keep and store them somewhere all the way around the world.
And how do you do that when you're sailing? You're full on. Do you have any sort of rest time that you can say, well, I'll fill that rest time with doing some experiments or whatever, or are you full on for 3 months? And is that what gets you round being busy?
I think you are busy, but you're structured in your time. So if you have bought into the idea that you're going to do this, it becomes part of your time. So a little bit like when you're charging your batteries to get your power, part of that process is to keep everything going. When you download your weather, or when you're waiting for your water to boil for your food, maybe you'll do whatever you need to do. So it's all part of how you structure the day and manage your boat. And I think that's important. If they bought into it, it's part of the process and it's not an extra burden. But you do get some downtimes, but in your downtime, that's when you're meant to be sleeping, eating or drinking in order to maintain yourself. So it's a balance.
It is. And it's, these boats are all consuming. They're complex. And as a result, there's nearly always something to be done to make the boat faster, better, more reliable. There's nearly never a time where you can say everything is nominal, I can go and get some sleep. You always have to accept that something is not quite nominal, and you have to have a plan that means that it's sustainable and the boat can run smoothly.
And how are things looking out there at the moment?
Yeah, still pretty bad.
It's a real distinct line, and that's got to be a complete change of weather in that line, what the wind and stuff is experiencing.
Yeah, there's some shots here where it suddenly looks awfully a lot better, but that particular shot a moment ago didn't look good at all. Frustrating for the sailors, they just want to get going now. This is all extending their adrenaline in running through their systems. It's putting more and more an edge on. The shore crew will be feeling tense as well.
Yeah, so the nerves, the tension, the pressure building as they mill around and wait for the start that is now just over half an hour away. Good opportunity to look back at the day so far.
Time
Or
check
not.
pour 30 minutes avant le départ. Time check for 30 minutes to the start.
I think, different people are working on different schedules in my ear at the moment. So we are getting underway still at 1 o'clock GMT. That is the plan at the moment. We're going to stay with this, obviously, until they cross that start line. And that's It's magnificent, doesn't it? And you can see how the weather has cleared up, because we could barely see Paprec earlier on with Sébastien Simon on board. And I'm just hearing radio announcement on in my ear that the race officer is confirming a start time of 30 minutes from now, so 1300 GMT. So hopefully they're happy with the conditions and that things have settled.
There is a bit more pressure now than there was certainly when they first came out. So the breeze is building, and I suspect the hope is that breeze will push away some of this mist. So there'll be a lot of people watching this, I guess, that won't have actually seen one of these boys fully boiling. But you know, the Imoca 60 has really developed quite a long way.
Are we going to see them foiling?
We should do. So, yeah. I mean, the latest generation, they're claiming they foil at 12 knots. So long as we've got 12 knots out there, we'll see it happen. I mean, the really nice thing is they're not in between any sails. No. You know, it's confident that it's a full main, so we're not having any reefs in the mainsail. And the decision for the sail choice is made very easily. They're going to be reaching, so they're not scared of putting the sail out. They'll put some stay sails in there, and they'll put as much sail plan as they can to get west as fast as they can.
Now, the organisers and us in the media, we like to, talk about just how tough this race is, and we were referring to earlier as the Mount Everest of sailing. Dee, well, and Mike, you've done the Vendée Globe. Dee, you've done the Volvo Ocean Race as well, and so both of you have done all sorts of round the world races and offshore racing and so on. Is the Vendée Globe the toughest ocean race?
I would say it probably is, yeah. I'd say it's the toughest, most competitive circuit, and the French are excelling at it and have done. And us Brits, we're just chipping away at it, and it's great that we've got so many contenders in this year. But it's a very, very tough event. And it's just the numbers tell you everything you need to know. The fact that so few people have tackled it, the fact that there's such a high attrition rate, the fact that there's only 6 women that have ever completed it. I mean, just any number you care to pick of the Vendée Globe completely shows you that this is no lightweight sport. And it creates great stories. I mean, the French love to say, whenever I go to the Sable d'Olonne, the thing I always remember is people come up to you in the street and, and they'll say, "Thank you for making me dream." And it's the thing that I used to hear so much, because the people that follow the race completely engage with it, and they're not worried about what shape your foil is, or they just follow the adventure of it. So there's two sides to this. One is pure competition, technology, innovation, sustainability, call it what you will. There's all these things going on. And they're all happening, but the average person tapping on the side of your boat on the normal start in the Sable d'Olonne doesn't give a monkeys about any of that. They just want to look in the eye and think, this girl or this guy is going to sail around the world, and they want to be with you on that journey for the next 3 months.
And they actually come up and tap on your hull, do they?
Good luck. I used to think they were trying to get my attention. I kept bobbing up all the time, and then you realise that everyone's going to look. It's incredible, but I think you're right. The fact that only 50% that start finish speaks volumes. I think the emotion it involves is all consuming. It grabs everybody, whether you are a sailor or not. You still want to follow this story of the simplicity of one person, one boat, one lap of the planet, and the fact that we don't really leave it. This is the first time, and it feels weird not being in Le Sable d'Olonne for the start of a race, because if you've done it, you still go back, even if you're not going to race, because it's where you want to be every 4 years. So
it is a who's who of
and we
sailing.
all return, and even if you're not racing, you're still involved somehow. If you're not talking about it like Mike and I, there's no former winners on this start line. Alex has come second, Jeremy Bayou has come third, and Alex has come third, and Sam has come fourth. But if we look at who's involved, Michel Desjoyaux is still involved. He's involved with Nicolas Troussel in the Quorum boat, and he's contributed to Arnaud Boissier in his boat development as well. Francois Gabard, the winner in 2012, Mayor Concept have owned Charlie Darlin's project with Apivia. Arnaud Leclerc has coached Clarissa Creamer with the Banque Populaire project, so he's still involved. And Vincent Rioux has worked with Sebastian Simon on Archaea Paprec and has managed the PRB project with Kevin Escoffier. So everyone's still so close to the projects and so close to the sailors and the adventure. And I mean, Rick Wilson has been in the South Dillon and he had to jump through hoops to get the paperwork to travel from America to go back, but he wouldn't dream of being anywhere else at this time of year. So it kind of grabs you and keeps you.
You've led us very nicely. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Uh-oh.
Who's your 1, 2, 3?
Oh, oh, my head says one thing and I think my heart says something a little bit different.
Well, let's go with your heart.
My
Come
heart,
on.
well, you know, I'm not a
I know what you're going to say. Go on.
Alex to do it. Change sailing on a global scale if a Brit can break through the French stronghold. I want Sam to get on the podium because I feel like she deserves it.
I thought you were going to say, you know, Sam Davis first, Miranda Meron second, and Pip Hare third, or any of those orders. Yeah.
Well, who would be my third one on there is Charlie Darling, just because, well, he's the golden boy as far as I think. And if my head was in charge, you know, Jeremy Bayou has had the most time on the water. Charlie Darling's definitely in there. He's not been off a podium, and he has had really good reliability with his boat. And I'll say the other person on there should be someone like Thomas Rouen with Linked Out, because he's tried and tested and he's got, you know, something to prove because he didn't get round last time. But there's the unknowns, the designs that haven't been tried and tested, the Quorums, Alex Thompson, Hugo Boss, the Archaea Paprec, you know, the 10 Provence, really good boats, really good sailors, they've gone together.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love the Octane where they've gone with that design, but I'd be surprised if they finish. And they just put from a reliability standpoint. I'm with you on Charlie Darling, but of course I'm with you also on Alex Thompson. I'd like to see Alex win the race. I think he'd worked hard for it. No one would deserve it more than Alex. He'd worked very hard for this, so if it comes good for him, you know, it's fully deserved. But the same could be said for Jeremy Bayou. And clearly they're the two outstanding front runners really, but Charlie Darling and Thomas Rouen, he's probably Linked Out, is probably a good sort of the newcomers. Sam, I could see her get. I really could.
Could definitely fight to be involved. That's what makes it exciting.
Yeah, so I do think that's a serious possibility. Clarice is, she's got a good boat.
That's experience, but she just takes it on, and that's what's nice. And they haven't been too clever.
Oh, they haven't gone forward, have they?
No, they've kept the inverted dagger boards.
Yeah.
So, you know, that kind of transition.
She'd be a fast one that would be.
Yeah, and she's really comfortable on the boat. She did a great job on the Deadly Azimuth when they all went out.
So it's interesting. That's an early arrangement of foils. Initially, they were vertical. Then they were vertical, and now they're out when they're trying to lift the platform. So you can almost see the evolution of the foils.
Well, you put each other on the spot. I think you covered pretty much the whole fleet there. Let's go on board and find out more about life on the sea.
Oui, ça c'est la journée.
Une ration quotidienne de nourriture conditionnée sous vide pour qu'elle soit préservée de l'humidité. Voilà comment se présente en général le sachet contenant les 3 repas journaliers d'un concurrent du Vendée Globe.
Ce tour du monde qui va durer pour moi plus de 90 jours, L'enjeu, c'était d'essayer d'avoir une nourriture variée, équilibrée et qui correspondra aux efforts que j'ai à fournir. Et j'ai demandé à Sophie de varier entre les plats lyophilisés, déshydratés, plats sous vide, où on aura du frais dans les provisions des premières semaines de course. Je pense que c'est là où on a peut-être le moins d'énergie dû à toute l'émotion du départ, toute l'énergie mise dans le projet. Donc c'est vraiment pour moi un facteur de réconfort.
Pour placer Alexia Barrier dans les meilleures conditions de performance physique et mentale, Sophie Turner, en charge de son programme nutrition, a estimé ses besoins entre 4 et 5 000 calories par jour, un apport 2 fois supérieur à celui d'un terrien qui peut encore être augmenté selon les régions où vous naviguez.
Un exemple, les mecs qui font la Volvo, ils prennent 9 000 calories par jour quand ils sont dans le Grand Sud. Moi, je ne suis pas un mec, donc on a fait beaucoup moins, mais il faut quand même arriver à engranger des calories pour lutter contre le froid et la difficulté des conditions météo là-bas.
Alexia emporte 105 jours de vivre, quand le japonais Kojiro Shiraishi, lui, table sur 80 jours. Des prévisions selon les goûts, les habitudes et les objectifs de chacun. Pour Alex Thompson, ce sera 67 jours, et pour Arnaud Boissière, 85. À J-3 du départ, tous les bateaux ont effectué leur ravitaillement, à l'exception du fret, embarqué au dernier moment.
Alimentation, fringues et pièces de rechange. Je crois qu'on arrive à un total de 165 kg de matériel. Le bateau est en capacité de partir et de faire le Vendée.
Well, it's kind of lunchtime here in the UK, but I have to say that freeze-dried food hasn't got the old stomach rumbling. How do you do it, Dee and Mike? How do you put up with that sort of food for so long?
It's not so bad. It's not as bad as what you think. And now there's so much choice. It doesn't matter if you're vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free. There's something for everyone. And it's just important to have variety and stuff that you like when you are feeling a bit down. There's nothing worse than repetition. On a Monday, you always have these meals on it. That's awful, even though you lose track of days a little bit. So it's quite nice. I worked on a 10-day bag and I could eat anything I wanted from that 10-day bag, but I wasn't allowed to move on to the next bag until that was that 10 days were up. But there's sometimes where you just don't want to eat it. And towards the end, it gets a little bit repetitive, but that's the nature of anything really, where the choice isn't open.
I know Ellen MacArthur always used to take a box of her mum's flapjacks on board. Is there anything you always used to take on board to eat, Mike?
Always a Dundee, a real nice Dundee tin Dundee. Absolutely beautiful. Brilliant. Cup of coffee or whatever. So yeah, I'd always have that. But I used to run the same bag system, wheat bags. But by about halfway through the race, I broke into every bag.
You don't disagree that well, yeah, knowing that you would break into yeah, no, I live a bit of discipline.
So the food is divided up into bags according to, I don't know, the day, the week, and so on.
So it's more, so within your kind of either week bag or 10-day bag, you have, your day bags in there, and it's more a case of dealing with the climate. So you're going to be in cold climates where you need a little bit more, and the warmer climates where you just want to change of what you want to eat. And everyone's going to have a preference, and their snacks or their little kind of morale booster will change accordingly.
And of course, you're probably approaching half a ton of gear on the boat, the loose gear, and every manoeuvre, every tack, every jibe, that's moved, and that means all your food as well. So the food is shifted about, so it's in bags partly for convenience of use, but also partly so that you can quickly move it across the boat. There's a lot of stacking systems inside the boat, and that may seem a bit trivial, like on a very big boat while you're moving all that kit, but it makes an enormous difference to the boat's performance. A stacked boat versus an unstacked boat is just chalk and cheese. One boat can be fully on fire and hitting all its numbers, and the other boat will be slightly saggy and not feel very tippy. It just doesn't feel right. If the boat isn't stacked and you haven't moved everything, that's a cause of a guilt complex. And I think I used to do the race basically using guilt as my guide. And if I hadn't done something, I wouldn't sleep until I'd done it. And you know, if I could
what did your psychologist have to say about that?
Well, I'm OCD, no question about it. But in a good way.
Crikey, what do you make of this studio?
I'm useful OCD. I could tidy up a bit, but I'm slightly OCD. But I think I'll tell you what. I think most sailors are a little bit OCD. It kind of goes with the territory. If there's a little leech line and my little leech on my jib is flapping, I will not leave that. I will definitely resolve it. If I know a sail isn't trimmed right and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and it's hailing outside, I will do what I need to do it. Because unless you're doing it, you're not doing your job. And my job as a race sailor was to sail a boat fast. So when it comes to that 3 o'clock in the morning call in the middle of the Southern Ocean, doing something you really don't want to do, well, you know, that's what separates out the people from the front of the fleet to the people at the back of the fleet. There's nothing wrong with being at the back of the fleet. They're probably preserving themselves better. But the reality is the difference between your Alex Thompsons and your Jeremy Hughes and all the rest of it is that you can guarantee that if there's something to be done, they will do it. They will not leave it. They would never go to sleep unless they know that the boat is the best it can be.
And it's about being in tune, understanding what those noises and vibrations are so you can deal with it, so you know that it's a leech line and you know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
But I think the food's always funny because people have these aspirations, but the reality is if you're tacking, you use gravity to help you move the stack a lot of the time. Sure. So you need stuff to be able to fall, because otherwise the cereal bar that you thought would be fine in 8 weeks' time is going to be just a bag of the crumbs, and you're going to be really disappointed with that. So you need to pack and organise your food really well, and there's so much nutritional information out there that people are very clever with the nutrition now and making sure what works. But you have to think about what you want in the middle of the night in the Southern Ocean when you're running on empty, and also what's going to last 25 tacks of being dropped from a great height.
You and I haven't sailed once effectively at one but with Echo 3 and their people, I always remember that you'd be in your bunk on the high side, and if there was a little slap of the water under the aft quarter, you knew you weren't fully powered up, and it was just like a little slap tap, and it would hit them, and that's the kind of signals you're talking about. You just knew that you weren't fully whipped up if you could hear that little slap, and so you get up, sheet on, do whatever you need to do to get that to go quiet, and the minute it went quiet, you're on the money again and the boat's hitting and gets done with. So it is a lovely relationship. You actually form a relationship with each of these boats, and you know, I've had 3 Open 60s. You know, I absolutely love the first one because it's the first one. I always love the first one the best. But you know, the boat that I was best suited to was probably Echo 2, my middle boat. The boat I did came 3rd in the Vendée. That boat was definitely on fire. Echo 3, I always found it a bit more of a struggle, but I knew the boat was faster, but it just didn't feel quite like Echo 2. It wasn't quite bulletproof. And so you form these little relationships with your boat where you understand them. And even though these are technological marvels, believe me, they'll be forming those relationships if they haven't done so at this point. And it's quite possible they haven't, because they haven't done as many miles as they'd like to do. But believe me, in 2 weeks' time, they will have it off pat. They'll know. They'll be fully in tune with those boats. And, you know, it's a very special thing, I mean, to get into that situation with a piece of mechanics. But occasionally, everything's right, the boat is moving along, you're going in exactly the right direction, you know you're catching the people or pulling away from the people around you, and you know, you stand on the backstay and you watch the world go by, and you know, you think, I'm probably the luckiest guy or girl, or you know, I'm the luckiest guy on earth. I've got a great job. What a cool job there.
I think the food conversation as well, when you think about stacking and everything, you spend a fortune in saving weight in very critical areas. If you just put titanium screws in your mast track to save weight, you don't then want to load up with a load of extra food that you don't need or you could do without. So it's a real fine balance. If you're going to work really hard to save weight, be ergonomic on the boat and efficient and get best performance, you don't then want to fill your boat with a heavy food. So the choices are really important. But also I think there's 18 people doing the Vendée Globe for the first time in this fleet. So there's 18 people that have no idea what food they're going to like for 2 to 3 months. So the unknown, whereas those that have the experience know exactly what food they like, know how they're going to react and how they get bored of different foods and what different textures. And having that knowledge of knowing what food to take is really an advantage.
I mean, I'm also, I never pride myself. I always had the best food I could get, and which means taking on board some fresh stuff at some weight penalty, but knowing full well that that would keep me more sane, and I wasn't just eating freeze-dried all the time. So, you know, I don't have things like cheese and stuff like that, stuff that can be made to last. I'd even have bread, you know, I'd even have some bread.
Knowing we were going to finish at lunchtime and knowing that Dee always has a pizza before heading off on a long voyage, that's what we'd ordered. But we're now delayed again till 13:20 GMT, 14:20 French time. So if they delay it again, I think you'll be reaching for your freeze-dried packet of food, Dee.
Deliver them.
So there's Alex Thompson in his magnificent boat, one of the favourites to win this. His 5th Vendée Globe, managed to finish 2nd last time after a titanic battle, for half the race really, with Armel Leclerc. And there was a few hours between them in the end, which is extraordinary when you think you've been racing for almost 3 months. And he's predicting that that the winning time is going to really drop. So last time round, 74 days, 3 hours and 74 days and 3 hours was the winning time. And he's actually talking, Alex, he's talking about maybe getting round in under 70 days.
Well, he did they've done some amazing research into this. He's run the weather models for 40 years. And looked at it, and the fastest time out there was actually 59 days, which is, you have to sail the boat at 100% to do that, but that's huge. But then equally, he said that the longest time out there was 100 days. So he's looking, the average was 70 days. So I think, all being well, and these boats in one piece, we're going to see the winner round in just under 70 days. Which is remarkable.
Yeah, well, we've got 8 newer generation boats, and we've got a cluster of good quality, refurbished, oil-borne additional boats. So, there's every reason to expect that the time will come down. Studying the weather for the last 40 years, it's my observation that you can't rely on statistical weather anymore, because weather is
it has changed so much.
It has changed so much. I mean, when we first started, we were using routing charts. We don't use it because they're different.
Depuis 30 ans, le Vendée Globe explore à sa façon les mystères de la mécanique humaine. Pourquoi ces marins, hommes et femmes, se lancent-ils au long cours d'une épreuve sportive unique en son genre? Peut-être qu'en allant autour du monde, ils font aussi le tour d'eux-mêmes. Et nous les terriens, paradoxalement, plus ils s'éloignent, plus ils nous transportent.
Ah non, 3 mois 3 mois
En solitaire, sans escale et sans assistance, on pourrait croire que la course est inhumaine. Or, il n'y a pas plus humain que le Vendée Globe.
Alors le Père Noël existe. Père Noël Ciao Ciao.
Soyons honnêtes, le Vendée Globe n'est pas toujours un cadeau. Il nous révèle que la voile hauturière est un sport de combat. Combat contre soi-même, contre ses adversaires et contre les éléments naturels.
Quand le bateau part au surf avec 10 mètres de creux, c'est pas humain. C'est effarant et fascinant à la fois. C'est peut-être aussi pour ça que je suis là.
I do wonder why I do it sometimes.
Il arrive que le drame rôde sur le Vendée Globe. Heureusement, l'épreuve a ses miracles et c'est Saint-Bernard des mers du Sud. Loïc Perron sauve Philippe Poupon qui attendait depuis 24 heures. La marine australienne sauve Thierry Dubois et Tony Bullimore. La marine australienne sauve encore Yann Eliès. Sur la longue route du Vendée Globe, le mythique Cap Horn marque la fin des mers hostiles et des sueurs froides.
Yahoo! Hey, on a passé la longitude du Cap Horn. Ça fait.
De Titouan-Lamazou à Armel-Lecléache, l'épreuve consacre des vainqueurs de plus en plus rapides, sans oublier d'honorer celles et ceux qui en terminent avec le tour de la planète. À son rythme, chacun écrit les pages d'une épopée intime et collective. Le Vendée Globe, c'est le tour du monde.
Well, some fantastic images of victory and victors, and all those winners very quickly pass into sort of French sporting legend, don't they? Because this is a really important race, and it's a really important sport for the French. It's part of their sporting culture. And I know, even school kids go on school trips to Les Sables d'Olonne to visit this famous canal that the boats travel up towards the start line. So it is an iconic race and an iconic venue for French sports fans and indeed sailing fans all around the world. And as you've mentioned, Dee, a lot of those champions then go on to either do it again, like Jean Le Cam, who just can't stop, or they run campaigns and for other sailors and sort of turn into management.
That's right, and I think it's all down to the experience. As we said, if you're new to the sport, you want to surround yourself with a team with experience to pass on and help fast track you. And we talked of a number of projects there. And I teamed up with Mike to do exactly that. And obviously the synergy was really nice as I got my first job in the industry for Mike. So I've kind of been developed and followed in his footsteps a certain amount of the way. And Pip Hare that we're seeing on the screen now is a British sailor. This has been a lifelong dream, but I spoke to her 2 weeks before leaving England to go down to France. And it was interesting. She's worked with Paul Larson, who's Rocket Man, as they call him, the fastest man on water. Done a lot of sailing, done a lot of development, but there was still that element of nerves for her for the unknown. And her question that she asked me was, do you jibe or do you chicken jibe? Oh. And it's interesting because
just explain that.
Well, in the south, you're obviously going downwind and you need to jibe as the wind shifts. But there are some skippers that go by the rule of thumb that they would rather tack the boat round than jibe the boat in the Southern Ocean. And I'd heard that before I left, but I'd been training to jibe, so I jibed and I haven't done the alternative. And so when she asked, and I was like, oh no, I jibe. And she said, oh, but I've been talking to people and everybody's in two different camps. And I laughed because I had that exact same thing of, oh, but some people do it differently, and should I be doing it different? And if you haven't been down there, you don't know. So I came from the jibing prospect, keep the boat going as fast as you possibly can, so that you take the loads out of everything, and then you spend a lot of time putting your keel in the middle, getting rid of your ballast, winding the main into the middle, because that's the bit that you've got to control, and then drive the boat, and the downwind sails will keep up at maximum speed. But some people choose that whole wind it all in, turn the other way around, go all the way upwind, and then go back down. What's your thought?
I've done both. I've done. If your rig's slightly dubious when taking the flick and the main through, then chicken jibes is quite quick. Because the other thing about it is you're literally throwing the boat through the wind. And you don't have to reef down. Whereas if you are jiving, you have to at least drop one reef in. If you're under any sort of decent pressure, you have to drop one reef in. And by the time you've done that, you turn the boat and you haven't had to do that reef. It's quicker to chicken jive because you don't have to drop that reef in.
Went through the process of that painful downwind reef in, and then you take it out on the other side. So it's about a 45-minute process.
It's around the chicken jive.
Yeah, but it was just the thought of all that flapping material that...
Well, you want the head to but, you know, I have done both. I've jived as well. And if I've got more confidence in the rig, with the old fixed rotation, I lost the confidence in that rig. And so consequently, I chicken jived it. But it wasn't slow. I wasn't losing places there.
And this because Pip Hare was asking, you know, which is the best policy. But her story is amazing. 46 years old. She's put her own money into the project, and she pumped money in, well, as much as she could gather. And it wasn't right till the end that last step towards getting a sponsor was finally made, that finally confirmed that she could go and do this. And you know, so off she goes in a boat that's 21 years old. And she's saying, all I want to do really is A, get round, because this is my dream. I want to be able to say I've done it. And B, wouldn't it be great to be Ellen MacArthur's time from 2000, which was 94 days.
Yeah, and she's still the fastest woman to sail around the world, so on her own. So it's a really nice target to go for. I think it'd be a huge story. But the only thing that was making Pip nervous was just the unknown of the south. And it is that element, if you haven't been there, of well, how cold is cold and how big is big with the waves and how strong is strong with the wind, and it's that unknown.
Well, in some respect, you have to put Pip into perspective because she is a journalist and a very prolific yachting journalist. A great communicator, and the result of that is that the Vendée is the perfect outlet for the things she already does in her life. And to be honest, she's going to be able to communicate the race in a way perhaps a lot of the more sophisticated sailors won't be able to, because they'll be too head down doing it. Whereas I can imagine with Pip, we're going to see Vendée Globe.
Well, we've seen she wears her heart on her sleeve, and because she was going through that whole kind of business club membership where there are lots and lots of partners, she's had to work really hard at the deliverables for that. And obviously in a COVID world, she's taken a lot of that digitally and online and done it in a different way. So I think that was a sign of things to come, and her communication, I think you're dead right, it's going to be great. Yeah. We know Sam is, loves being out there, so is really happy to communicate, and Clarissa is the same.
Yeah.
So I think there's some really...
It's a nice story. Sam, you can always tell by the way people talk. You know how you know. When someone's talking, you can tell whether they're happy or whether they're not happy. Particularly people who have got where their heart is. So, it's very hard to pull a charade over and say, yeah, it's all fine when actually, it's all come apart and your bits.
Yeah, and actually people want to know when it's hard and tough, and I think people are willing to share that with people.
Yeah. And another woman who's looking good for a good finish is Clarisse Premet, who you've just mentioned on Banque Populaire. She's coached and sailed with Armel Leclerc, the winner of the last race. So you've got to fancy a good campaign from her.
Solid. I mean, she's had a massive acceleration from 2017, coming second in the Mini Transat. Had this huge acceleration, but has been in such capable hands and on a boat that's got a really good team behind it. So she's really confident, and they haven't gone too complex. They haven't put foils on it and made it a technology advancement. It's a simple boat that you can then manage, and should any foiler have any problem, Banque Populaire will be nipping at the heels.
Yeah, and it's a boat that's won the Vendée Globe back in 2012 with François Gabard, wasn't it? So some real stories, some real passionate stories out there to be told.
Ça, c'est toujours impossible, les trucs en 3 mots. Moi, aujourd'hui, c'est un point d'interrogation, l'inconnu, l'aventure, le courage. La peur.
La vision du Vendée Globe, selon Clarisse Kremer, jeune femme multidiplômée dont la trajectoire ne s'inscrivait pas nécessairement dans la course au large. Un passage remarqué par les classes Mini et Figaro, et la voilà qui se retrouve en partance pour un tour du monde à la barre d'un IMOCA.
Ce qui a été important pour moi, c'est de savoir que j'ai été choisie d'abord par le directeur technique du team Banque Populaire, par Renaud Lucas, avant d'être choisie pour un profil de communication ou des choses comme ça. Et donc, dès le début, le côté savoir-faire sur un bateau et apprentissage et performance faisait partie quand même du projet.
Au sein du team Banque Populaire, Clarisse Kremer emboîte le pas d'Armel Lecléache, vainqueur du Vendée Globe 2016. Un passage de témoin, en quelque sorte, qui ne lui met pas la pression pour autant.
On peut avoir la pression parce qu'on se met la pression tout seul, on peut avoir la pression parce que les autres nous la mettent, un sponsor ou des choses comme ça. Moi, c'est vrai que l'objectif depuis le début, c'est essentiellement de terminer le Vendée Globe. Après, forcément, il y a l'angoisse et les incertitudes liées à l'aventure, à la nouveauté, à toutes les découvertes que je vais avoir à faire pendant le Vendée Globe, mais ce n'est pas une pression du résultat.
En 2017, elle arrivait sur le circuit Mini. L'année suivante, elle mettait le cap sur le Vendée Globe. Clarisse Kremer, ou l'histoire d'une progression hors norme.
On m'a proposé cette aventure extraordinaire, c'est une chance folle. Je ne sais pas si je le mérite vraiment, mais quand on a une chance comme ça qui nous est donnée d'accéder à des gros bateaux, de se mettre dans l'idée qu'on va préparer le Vendée Globe alors que ça fait pas si longtemps qu'on y pense, oui, c'est hyper privilégié, mais j'en suis consciente et du coup, j'essaie tout simplement d'être à la hauteur de cette chance.
So we were talking about, some of the questions that the rookies might want to ask you guys, and I suppose those of us who aren't sailing also want to know, what are the things that they'll be looking forward to? What are the dangers that they will hope to avoid?
Well, the hard thing now when they cross this start line is getting into the rhythm of things, and it's quite a messy weather pattern. I mean, the first day is simple, but after the second low pressure on Tuesday, they've got a real messy weather situation in the North Atlantic, all the way past the Canaries down to the Cape Verdes. There's no real trade winds established early on, so they're going to have to deal with that, and it's going to be very hard to get into a rhythm. Once you get past the Canaries, I think the good sign then is you start to take your layers off because it warms up and you can get into your warm weather sailing. And then the first kind of big trip hazard is about lining up for the doldrums and having clear passage. And for anybody that watched the TJB last year, they would have seen Charal have a massive lead on everybody and then lose 100 miles in the doldrums where they got shut down and the others went through. And they finished on the podium but in third place after a massive lead. So I think that's the kind of the highlight of the warm weather suddenly coming and warm water, and then the technical bit of getting the doldrums right.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, for me, it's getting out of Biscay can be problematical. Historically, it can be problematical. We've got pretty good forecast here.
I'm just going to jump in because this is a good sign. The crew are getting off the boats and onto the rib. Now, I've had confirmation in my ear several times from the race officer that the race is going to get underway, but I think this time it is looking for sure. So we're about 12 minutes now from that start. Right.
Yeah, I was just saying that once you're out of Biscay and you start to make your way south, you're waiting for that first flying fish because that means you're starting to get those trade wind conditions. Even if you've not got trade winds, things start to warm up, the sailing becomes a bit more benign, a bit more predictable, and you know that you're set for a week or two of pretty nice sailing. Of course, then it'll be a big tactical decision about whether to push to the west or whatever. But the doldrums, so these are the high points. The doldrums are probably a little bit of a worry because it's the place where you can get left behind. But then you've got the same in the south, effectively trade conditions. But then arriving in the south, the first time you come out that hatch and you feel the nip of the south and you start feeling that the sea state is adopting that trend. And then as you push further south, of course, the constant awareness of the fact that there may be ice anywhere along the racecourse, icebergs anywhere. Even though they've got this barrier, well, it's not a barrier,
the
virtual barrier.
The ice exclusion zone, as they call it, yeah.
Which used to be gates. There used to be no barrier. It used to be a single point, and then it was gates, and now it's a barrier. And that really is quite difficult. I mean, as a competitor, I find that quite difficult because it means you're literally sailing up against a coastline, effectively, for all the way around Antarctica, which is a hell of a lot.
But that ice exclusion zone isn't that far up, is it?
It's quite a long way.
It's further than you think when you look at the routing, but they have managed to drop it. There's only one massive iceberg that they've seen that's just south of South Georgia Island. That's 135 kilometres inside. So that's probably going to break up at some point. But they basically start the analysis in September from a company called CLS, looking at the ice and the icebergs, and they put the barrier accordingly to keep the boats away from the worst of the ice, and they monitor it, and they can only change it ahead of the first boat. So everybody will have the same route, and if there's any that stray into the area for any of the boats behind, they get a position report of that ice, so they can keep awareness of it.
And what about Cape Horn, you know, this sort of mythical, you know, legendary place for mariners?
Well, it's a pinch point. I mean, obviously you're then pinned between the ice barrier, the ice gate, what do you call it, the exclusion zone. You're pinned between the exclusion zone, and of course you've got nowhere to go. Everywhere else in the ocean, you've got an expanse of ocean where you can, you know, you can move the boat around in the weather system. When you arrive at Cape Horn, there is no option. You're going around Cape Horn. And of course, the reality is that it's very shoal water, and so you can get some incredible waves as you approach Cape Horn. And in the, you know, going around the Horn, you want to keep it pretty close, and you want to try and get inside, if possible, sail the shortest distance inside the Stad and leaving an island on your right-hand side and just cutting through the channel. And all of that is fraught with risk because you're tired. You're at the end of a Southern Ocean part of the race, and you know, in 2012, I had to do something like 18 jives, and I did jive. 18 jives all the way down to Cape Horn, coming down the Chilean coast. It was absolutely beautiful. But I was looking at my computer screen with my charting on it. I'd plotted all the ice, and honestly, there was so much ice on my screen that I didn't know where. I was certain I was going to come up against great ice.
Our first view of the start line of the Vendée Globe, and they painted it on the sea for us.
How did they do that?
Incredible. And we're now under 8 minutes from the start, and the race officer is counting down the crews to get off the boats. We've seen that. They're now giving instructions to the skippers and counting them down as they head towards that start line. Now, obviously, this is a 3-month race. It's not, you know, an Olympic race, a couple of upwind and downwind legs. So the motivation and tactics on the start line are very different. What are they?
These are natural competitors that are starting a yacht race, so they still want to have a good start. They still want to do a good job for the images that are going to be left with everybody as they sail into the sunset. So don't be fooled that they're going to have their foot off the throttle at all. They still want to, you know, hit the ground running when that gun goes. So they are going to be wanting to line up. If anybody does happen to be a little overzealous and be over the line early, what we call OCS, they will not have a chance to come back and cross the line again, because obviously it's too risky with 33 boats starting. So they will have a 5-hour time penalty put in place on them, and they have to take that before they pass I think it's roughly the line of Lisbon. So they get to choose when they do it, but it has to be taken relatively early on. So it's not really worth doing. 5 hours when they're doing these kinds of speeds will be very costly.
You see pretty much every boat here is set up on port, and they're slowly tracking down to the line. They can slow themselves by pointing the boats downwind, or they can reach up and sail along the line. So the majority of them are on the northernmost end of the line, but they're all predominantly doing the same thing and just trying to time it down now. 6 minutes to go, they'll be able to see on their electronics how much distance, time to burn they've got. So you have a little thing where you put the line in and it tells you the time to burn to the line. And what you want is the time to go and the time to burn to be pretty much the same and consistent.
Now, the last two editions have been touched on this already. 2 boat races from about halfway, around the globe. Do you see anything in this race that will make that difference? Do you think the larger variety of boats might mean a more even fleet?
I think there's an element of a few of these new generation spoilers. That's the way to go.
Seconds, 7, 6,
So these crew have to do 4 minutes.
3,
If any crew are left on after the 4-minute sound signal, then there will be a penalty as well.
You would expect the Hugo Boss crew to leave with some drama. And there's no just getting off the rib, it's leaving it to the last second. And there are people all around the world watching these pictures thinking, oh, I'd love to do that.
So they haven't had any danger of the rib being close to the boat and causing any problems as the boat's going along. It does solve a lot of problems.
On the ocean race, didn't they have top sponsors jumping off the backs of boats?
It's a massive spot of, people are desperate to have that role where you're the leg jumper and you sail the first bit with the team and then you jump off right away.
The extra person. So it's a bit like that. So now you can see a couple of different strategies going on here. They're all still on port, but Chorale is heading up, trying to burn speed in that direction and get himself on the right hand side. And that probably starting on the left hand side of the fleet will give you the opportunity to put the bow down and potentially promote early foiling. So perhaps that's what's going on in Chorale's head, in Germany's head.
But also it's about staying safe. You don't want to crash into another boat. You don't want to cause an accident, because that's not what this race is about. This race is about getting around the world, not about being off the start line first. And ultimately it doesn't really matter whether you cross that line last or first, does it? And I've heard rumours and stories about people actually making sure they're last across the line so that they get plenty of coverage for their sponsors.
I don't know about that. I reckon you'd never, to use a very current word, I've never seen a race fleet 3 minutes before the race so socially distanced. So,
but the start line is 1.3 miles, which actually is quite a long distance, but obviously we've got 33 boats to fit in there, so it will feel busy, and as you start accelerating, people will feel a lot closer. The breeze is predominantly from the south, and they have a mark that they have to leave on their port side, so on their left, which is like just a passing mark. They don't have to round it, it's just there. It's about 7 miles away. So, and the fleet strategically will be heading west as fast as possible to get through this front as fast as possible. So it's going to be a really nice reaching start.
So that's a great shot there. With all these shots, aerial shots, you can't really tell where the start line is. So there you get a perfect view of it. And you can start to see that some of these boats are really starting to wind themselves up, get these big sails set, get some speed on the boat.
And now I imagine, we've talked a lot about the psychology of the sailors, about how they're feeling. Well, I suspect now they've got rid of everyone else from the boat. They're in their zone, they're focused, and they've probably given a big sigh of relief and gone, right, let's get down to business.
It's a really strange feeling when everyone gets off. You've been working with your team for all the months and even years beforehand. You can see that actually a few of those boats are getting quite close to each other there. So, but it is a very strange feeling, and suddenly you're there on your own, and you've got to think, right, now I've got to do this and get this done. It is a risky time, to be honest. There's lots of things can go wrong. You make a simple error. So everyone's aspiring not to do that, but that doesn't mean you won't do it.
But excellent conditions for these new boats that haven't been as tested as you'd normally expect them to be because of the COVID situation. So excellent conditions, not too difficult for them, so they can try out the systems. They can push the boat a little bit without actually risking anything.
Yeah, they've got nothing scary.
No, nothing scary.
Tuesday there's going to be some gusts to deal with.
Okay.
But the sea state, you know, we're talking 4 meters on Tuesday, so they've got a couple of days to get into it without any fear of any risk.
Any second you'll start to see the fleet rotating all towards the start line. You can. I felt I was seeing that already. So there you go. You're starting to see boats putting the hammer down. 35 seconds to go. They're worried about being over. You can see one or two chickening out. That makes the other one chicken out. You can see these two boats nearest us. And all that's happening, they're trying to burn off a bit of time. They definitely don't want to be early. They're not early now. They can go now.
Yeah, you don't want to start with a 5-out penalty. And this is Yves Orbinet, the race director, starting the race.
4, 3, 2, 1, top!
And the cannon fires, and the 2020 Vendée Globe is underway, and someone very close to that line, I think it might be Occitan, we'll have to check that that was a clear start. But the Odyssey has begun. So for some, it's all about winning. For others, it's just about getting round. It's just about following their dreams. Whatever their target, whatever their motives, all these sailors, all 33 of them, will face 26,500 grueling miles and 3 months of non-stop hard work. And that was Bureau Ballet, who was really close to the line at the start.
Wow. And my heart was in my mouth when I saw that start from then. And you just think, oh God.
That's so close.
But look how close they went to that committee boat, or the Coast Guard ship, I should say.
Yeah. What a great sight. That's a whole, yes, we're off moment. Yeah. And, you know, you sheet on and trim on and feel the boat accelerate. And
oh, Dee's glowing watching this.
Because I kind of feel like I'm there.
I mean, he didn't just start first, he's also on the money straight away. You know, he's got speed on everyone, so that's a nice little, that's a handy little beginning. He'll be loving that. Let's just hope he wasn't over.
I hope he wasn't over, but you know, great footage, great confidence build to him, great big sponsors, and the boats there. You can see now a lot of the boats are starting to get a stay sail in between their head sail, their Jenica and their main sail there. Come on, Maxime, that was a hint. Get your stay sail up.
So Maxime Sorel. But it was Louis Burton first across the start line in his third Vendée Globe. He knows what he's doing. He has the experience. Maxime does not. This is all new for him. How's he going to race it? What's his strategy? What are his tactics? And I imagine you can go out with all sorts of ideas, but it's all about being flexible.
Yeah, you have to adapt. It's an ever-changing environment that you're in. So adapt and overcome, which has kind of been the theme for 2020, is going to be what it's all about for these 33 sailors now as they take on the world's oceans. Just want to see one of these new boats pop and see it go. It would be lovely.
Well, we'll keep our eyes on those foils. 12 knots minimum to get them up. Well, we shall see. It's quite light. The last reading I saw just before the start was about 5.5 knots, I think. But I think it's there's a bit more than that now. Yeah.
À très bientôt, merci à tous, merci à toutes. J'ai collé cette course pour ceux qui n'auraient pas entendu, il y avait un bateau.
So everything's cleared now. There doesn't seem to be a mist cloud out there. So the race committee have done a really good job there, just holding off. I think it's good for the competitors and safer and it's better for us watching. If you expect it to be finished by now.
Yeah. What I do want to know is, in the virtual regatta for the e-sailors, did they have a delay as well?
Ah, well, that's a very good question.
Start postponed.
That's a very question.
I didn't deal with it. I didn't take my start.
Mine, we better get plus that start.
I told you, you've got to upgrade your boat. It especially sells itself. But yes, Dee, referring to the e-sailing Vendée Globe race, which has got over 400,000 sailors taking part in real time with this race, and the conditions are match the real conditions. So they should have been delayed if they weren't. And we shall see, and we shall see how that goes, and we shall see who the champion. It was an Australian, Matt, who won it last time round, and I know he's competing again this time. So we'll see if he defends his championship title. Clarisse Crémet there on Banque Populaire, but still out front is this Bureau Valley by Louis Burton, with Louis Burton on board.
Yeah, it's a long-term sponsorship for Louis. He's just been a steady progression over the years. I think he would like a newer boat, a newer generation boat, but hasn't quite managed to achieve that this time. I think this is the difficulty. I mean, he's got a very good sponsor, very loyal sponsor, but perhaps a sponsor that can't extend to the financial commitment of a new generation boat, and it is now a significant commitment. You know, newer generation boats, to build them, you're looking at over a year of time, and you know, upward of six million pounds. So a hell of a lot of money to build a new generation boat.
And Louis Burton will have got a big cheer from school kids around France, because one of the things he's been working on with his team is a pack of how to discover the oceans of the world that has done the rounds of all the schools in France. So they'll have been studying that and learning about the ocean and the natural surroundings. So they'll be cheering on Louis Burton. But this is Sébastien Simon on Arkea Paprec.
And of course, at this point, they're making their way to the first mark, to the clearance mark, before they can resume the course. But I'm guessing their course change won't be too significant here.
No, the way the course was set, that mark really isn't going to play into it. It's just on the third pass. But the foiling boats are now up at around 17 knots. So we'll start to see them overtake those that are the non-foiling boats, just because they've just got that little extra bit of pace in these conditions.
Now, well, there we go. We've got the leaderboard already with
Boris Herman.
Yeah, Boris Herman out in front, Louis Burton third, and Rouillard in second place. Thomas Rouillard, yeah.
And for the tracking, they're going to have this live tracking and position report it's updated every minute until 3 o'clock, and then it will settle down to be every 30 minutes, but we'll obviously get the position reports at the set time. So the race control have a lot more information about the fleet as a security measure, and they can see if people are pointing the wrong way or got a big change of speed, so they can anticipate if there are any problems.
À vous toutes et tous, amis skippers, au nom de la SEM organisatrice du Vendée Globe,
so a message from the race
je vous
director.
souhaite très sincèrement un beau et un bon tour du monde, et au plaisir de vous
Wishing them good
retrouver.
luck.
Bon vent.
And he's looking forward to their return. And fair winds. And I'm sure all of us watching these images at home also wish them the very best, and we will follow with great interest over the next 3 months. They'll keep us entertained at a time when sporting entertainment is missing to a large extent, so we can feed off the action and the adventures of these brave skippers. Boris Herman currently out in front. There we go, 17.5 knots right now.
Yeah, I think he's bumping places back and forth with Bureau Valley still. They're pretty much in the same space, and depending on where you look, whether you look on the screen or on the website, they're in 2 different spots. So I think they're pretty much in the same place. But
we should say that, you know, these IMOCA 60s are not boats that you only see once every 4 years. There is an IMOCA circuit, and they're out there racing every year as we look at this fantastic image probably from the shore, actually.
I mean, these boats will do the Fastnet race, a race sort of, that's keen to us here in the UK. But they also do the Rue de Rhum, the Jacques Vabre, and numerous other events. So they have a whole rolling program of yacht races, the pinnacle of which is the Vendée Globe, but those other yacht races keep the circuit active throughout the period, throughout the 4-year cycle. And then once every 4 years, at the end of this Vendée Globe, these skippers will all meet up and dictate the rules for the next 4 years of Vendée Globe, and then once that rule is made, it's sealed in stone, and it cannot change. So.
And Britain's Sam Davis there with the red boat, fifth on the left-hand side of the screen. Initiative Kerr, a tremendous movement that she's created, where people can go onto the website, and I think on the phone app as well, and donate money to the charity that helps with heart operations for young people around the world.
I'm so pleased that they've just had such lovely weather for this start. I know we had to wait for the cloud to clear, but to lead in flat water, the sun shining, for the teams to be able to support them out there, it's just such a really nice send-off for what's going to allow them to experience all types of weather at all levels of wind speed and extreme temperatures.
Thomas Rouillon on linked out. He had to retire from the last Vendée Globe when his boat was almost split in two in a collision with one of those UFOs that we were talking about, those floating objects just west of New Zealand. And that will have stoked the fire in his belly for more success in this race. Jeremy Bayou on the left there, Armel Tripon. Now, we were talking about monitors, weren't we? On wrist monitors, heart monitors, all sorts of monitors.
So that on his arm,
that's his timer. Yeah.
If you to believe the data off the tracker website at the moment, I'm not sure. I think it's all catching up with itself. But Chiral is Jeremy Bayou. We're doing 15, 16 knots. Yeah. Which is a hell of a lot faster than the boats around it. But I'm not sure if this data's kind of caught up with itself.
Well, I have to say that Mike said earlier he's not particularly geeky and into his into the technical side of it. But I just looked over, and you're on the Alex Thompson website where and monitoring his heartbeat.
Yeah.
So,
is Alex?
Well, we'll get an update from the data hub over on my right side here in a moment, as we watch Coram making good speed.
Really late delivery to the water, this project, but they put some worked with Seb Joss and Nicholas Lumvan, and a really weird design, as in the deck goes across the coach roof, so it's all one material. There isn't a deck and a coach roof, and it makes his cockpit massive. So interesting.
And Nicola Troussel there sailing away with a spectator boat. Most of the spectator boats had to be cancelled for social distancing reasons, but at least they managed to get some people on the water to see this close up and personal. And what a different scene this is from 4 years ago, when the boats were followed by a flotilla, an armada of pleasure boats.
Yeah, it's a nice gentle getaway. I think there'll be a lot of relief from within the fleet that it's all gone smoothly. We haven't heard anything from the race committee indicating anyone was over early. It's a bit settled down.
Nice.
And going well. Right in there with the bunch. There we go. You start to see a foiler working there. Coram's displaying the early signs of
Looked like Troussel was just looking over the side there. Where's the foil? Am I up on it yet? You've been on Hugo Boss, Mike.
Yeah.
How does it feel as it rises up? Is it a weird feeling?
No, not at all. In fact, in some respects, it's very smooth because obviously riding up on the foil, all the small waves disappear, so the boat seems to smooth out as it rides onto the foil, and to some extent it quietens down. But obviously it's not being on the foil that is the problem, it's coming off the foil that is potentially problematical. And no, I thought it was okay. I mean, it was extremely wet, there was a lot of water flying around, mostly from the leeward foil and some off the bow. It was remarkably, I went on there sceptical and came off sold.
And at the moment, a lot of the fans watching from their balconies and windows are waiting for the tricolores of the French Air Force, giving the 33 skippers the ultimate send-off.
Some of the newer generation of boilers, I mean, we've talked a lot about how difficult it is, and obviously in rough conditions, in strong conditions, it is very difficult. But some of the newer boilers, and I'm thinking of Roquetaine in particular, because the hull is much smaller, narrower, less volume, and because of that design of foil, it's actually quite smooth. I understand that it runs quite smooth.
A real morale boost for the French nation, who have been put into lockdown for a second time, like many other countries in Europe. And there was a question over, would the race happen, would the race not happen? And it has happened, and they have started, and they've proved that despite everything, they can do it. And the tricolores flying overhead, just boosting the spectacle and giving us some real excitement at the start of this 2020 Vendée Globe. Now, we've talked a lot about Hugo Boss and the panels and so on. Life on board, although he's enclosed in that cockpit that they've designed, especially painted it pink. But inside, down below, it is really dark, isn't it? And it's all black, and it's not painted, and it's quite stark. And frankly, the pictures I've seen make it seem pretty depressing.
Well, yeah, the black inside of a boat is pretty depressing, but boats don't tend to paint the inside to save a bit of weight. Paint is surprisingly heavy. But in reality, one of the things about that boat is that his cockpit is much further forward than most of the boats, so he's actually located up not far behind the mast, in fact. So so the lines coming in from the mast are pretty much coming straight down to the winch array that he has down there, and it also means that it's very close to the keel box. So any water that comes in with those lines is immediately drained out into the keel box. So it's a surprisingly efficient system. It works remarkably well. But in conditions like this, he's got some pop-out overhead hatches, just like a bit like you're seeing here, but he has some pop-out hatches, so he'll be able to poke his head up and get a view of what's going on. The boat he can steer from there, but he can also run on autopilot from there and make all the sail adjustments. So he's effectively inside, but he is protected from the worst of the weather. As soon as it gets a bit faster, he'll have to put those hatchways back in, because otherwise he'll start filling up the water. And his only access then is through a sort of bulkhead and out through the aft, and it's a tiny little hatch in the centre of the boat, in the back of the boat, that gets him out, a few feet away from the aft traveller. So it's quite a strange arrangement. It takes a bit of getting used to. But we're just starting to see Chorale here. The minute you start to see that bow bouncing up like that, the boats are just on the edge of getting going.
I know Alex Thompson has plastered photos of his family around that black cockpit just to cheer him up. And at the moment, everyone is being cheered up by the French Air Force and their tricolore squadron, who have come for a second fly past. And I wonder if the skippers actually have time to look up and enjoy the spectacle, or if they're just so focused and concentrated on getting the boat nicely sailed. And I guess now they're still doing checks, still sort of thinking, well, we haven't quite set this up as I want it, and making those last adjustments.
Yeah, they're going to be looking at their boat speed, checking the sail trim, having a quick look at the computer to make sure they're tracking along the routing that they anticipated would be happening. So there's a lot of kind of just things to stay aware of while they're looking at the bigger picture, what everyone else is doing, and absorbing the fact that they're now sailing away from the land and, you know, not going to leave for a while.
It doesn't look, you can see it's trying to get up on the foil there. It doesn't look fully wicked up. What I mean by that, it doesn't look fully powered up. But one of the interesting things is all these boats have canting keels. Boats like Chirao, to get herself up on a foil, normally the canting keel is poked out to windward to move the bulb of the boat as far away from the boat as possible. But because there's an instance angle on the keel, they actually drop their keels back down to centre, and they don't use that at all. They allow the foil to provide all the righting moments, so the boat rests all its energy on the foil, and that promotes the boat lifting early and stops you from losing that righting moment.
We talked about the hardships on board. Sam Davis waving goodbye. Emotional moment for her family watching back home. But yes, we've talked about the hardships on board, and you know, the difficulties and the dangers and so on. And then, you know, we come to the prize money. And when you see the prize money, you realise that they're not doing this for cash. They are doing this because it is a dream, because it is a challenge and an adventure that they've always wanted to do. So 200,000 euros goes to the winner of the Vendée Globe. And then second place gets 140,000, third place gets 100,000. It's basically a pot of 800,000 euros that is divided up amongst the whole fleet. So yeah, they're not in it for the prize money, but they are in it for the trophy, and a fine trophy it is too.
And to join a very elite family. There aren't that many people that get to do this and be part of it, but it's one of the few events where there is prize money available. So we may scoff at the prize money, but sailing isn't known for having its prize money, that's for sure.
That's an interesting sound. It's more of a spinnaker, more Janica arrangement, like a blast Janica. Whereas most of the foilers, the newer boats, are running much flatter sails because they're generally sailing at much higher speeds. This is a kind of an awkward interface that it strikes me, that we're not quite fast enough to fully see the boats lit up. But at least everyone's sailing, and they're sailing well and fast. I suspect we would want a little more wind, or to see the boats a little more wigged up.
Just isn't quite enough to get them all excited, but I mean, it's nice to be making progress in the right direction.
Yeah. Which is the stretch of ocean you think they're looking forward to most?
For me, my favourite's the South Pacific, just because the wave length is a bit longer. The Indian tends to be a bit more risky. There's potential for a few surprises in there, but the Pacific seems a bit more organised, and the wave length. And you've also got used to the Southern Ocean by then, so you get to enjoy it a bit more. But you know you're probably going to get nailed by something between you and Cape Horn. You know, it's going to happen at some point. But if you take that to one side, it's...
I would pick the Atlantic.
I think it's pretty tough.
I like the trade winds. I mean, who wouldn't? It's champagne sailing, you know. And it doesn't last for long because the boats are quick. They go through it pretty quickly. But when you're in it, you enjoy it because you've got stable weather, plenty of wind, good waves, nice warm water, wildlife visible around the boat. It's nice, you know, and then the minute you can get the shorts on, it's going to be good. The Southern Ocean, I personally find it all a bit stressy because of the potential of what's to come. But, you know, if you're wearing the right kit, and these guys will all be wearing very good kit, Cold weather's not so bad. Just there's no cold weather. There's only bad clothes. Yeah, so.
But the fact is that most of the time in this race is actually spent in the Southern Ocean, isn't it?
But you have to imagine that these boats are geared up for that. This is what these boats are designed to do. You get in the Southern Ocean, you get yourself into a rhythm with the weather system, and it's a dream to behold to watch how many miles you can sail just by the power of the wind and sea.
It will be interesting actually with these faster boat speeds, the potential for them to stay in one system for a lot longer in the south. I mean, we're used to the system passing over us. But
there's a perfect comparison right there.
Yeah.
Of Aviva going past someone. I'm not sure who that is. Okay.
No, I think it's Damien Seguin.
But there was a little spurt there, and it seems to have gone now. Absolutely. But you can see it's quick. That might be camera rotation, some of it. In other words, the ribs rotating around the view. But
Jeremy Bayou, then one of the front runners and one of the favourites for the race on board Charal in his 4th Vendée Globe, so matching your number, Mike. 2 of those he's had to abandon, but goodness, last time round he was on the podium in 3rd place, following Armel Leclerc and Alex Thompson. And I wonder if we're going to see him on the podium again. I mean, you've got to fancy his chances, haven't you?
I mean, the ultimate would be Jeremy Bayou, Alex match race around the world.
Yeah.
The 2 that were on the podium before, the 2 that have the new generation boats.
Yeah. I think you have to assume that Alex and Jeremy are going to be the top front runners, but you look at this boat here, you look at Coram, you look at a number of boats of this generation, the young, hungry sailors that want it. Charlie Daniel, they want to win, and of course everyone wants to win, but when there's a hunger that you only get by never having done this race before, and I'm not taking anything away from that. I'm sure they're just as hungry, but you know what I mean. When you're at an age and you've got an opportunity like this, you're going to go out there.
That's a really nice shot of Sam straight there. Yeah. The bow is basically out of water, and what they found when they first started foiling on the modified boats is the reinforcement on the bow wasn't in the right place where the wave action hits now, because they're lifting so much more. So they've all had to put the reinforcement further aft in the hull of the boat to protect it for when it impacts the waves. And the newer generation boats actually sail out the water just trailing the rudder, that aft quarter with the rudder in the water. So when they get the right conditions, they don't really have any impact.
For a while, the boats went to monolithic slamming. I'm not sure why they've moved away from that. Obviously, they can do a composite structure just as efficiently. I mean, composite structures are very good, but the slamming loads when you were doing these sort of speeds that we're hearing about.
Because that was one of the step-ups that Sam did on the Route de Rome, where she had to retire or transfer. One of the races she did early on was the delamination. She had a Nomex 4 and it couldn't cope with the slamming, so they had to cut that section out and rethink how they were going to engineer the section of her hull under impact.
To my mind, Alex has chosen a very conservative sail plan. He's not running with a masthead sail. He looks like he's running with a fraction or with his genoa. Either we're expecting the wind to build quite quickly, which is quite a possibility, or he's just taking a conservative view, which is probably less of a possibility. But you can see the boats with masthead sails are looking. I'm sure Alex wants to get away safely, and we all know that when he's in the right place and he puts the hammer down, he's quite capable of burning up a lot of miles very, very quickly. And maybe he just selected that now's not the time to do it.
Well, Boris has gone for a similar decision there without a masthead sail.
Yeah, so split choice. And now, why would you make that decision? It would seem counterintuitive to the non-racer, but to set or take off one of these big masthead sails is a massive job. You'll lose miles out of it.
Yeah, so they're pitching, so to make it happen, you have to do a big barrel
exactly.
on the sail.
So you have to be. So it's a calculated risk to run with this smaller sail plan, be a little bit off the pace for a while, but not suffer from having to make that big sail change. And I think that that's what's going on here. Some of these boats are just saying, well, the hell, let's go. And some of them are saying, well, the reality is it's a big change because you've got to get that sail back down on deck, which means you have to do a full-on dial back. Oh, there were 2 people on the boat there.
Our Melanie's alter ego. There's a nice image there of the bow of Aquitaine, with it being a scow bow, much more fuller, more bulbous, having that lift.
I could look at that one.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
I don't know whether it's beautiful. I could look at it because just every part of it gives you a reward. and much the same could be said for this boat, actually. It's a nice looking boat.
Nicolas Troussel.
It may be that it's a different site. So you've got Samuel Maynard, and now there's 1K here. So just not a VPLP, means there's something else to look at.
There's something else to look at. The VPLP, we've got kind of used to it. That's not to say there's anything wrong with VPLPs. There clearly isn't.
Apparently a really big, comfortable cockpit, this one.
Yeah.
Sort of cocooning the skipper out of the cold and the wet.
You were saying, Dee, that the deck kind of morphs into the cockpit.
That's right. There's no separation between the deck and the cockpit or the coach roof. It's all one layer. So it really adds a lot.
That's right. So it's kind of water running along it. You poke your head out to have a look.
Well, we're going to stay on air a few more minutes just to see these boats off because they are a beautiful sight. Les Sables d'Olonne. In the distance on the coastline there with its magnificent beaches, pretty much deserted at the moment, but normally ram-packed with people coming to cheer on the boats.
I'm still showing Bura Valley leading, and I think that's Bura Valley, and then Chirao. So that's what we're seeing there. We're seeing the front 2 boats. So whether the focus is off Bura Valley because she pre-started, I'm just wondering if we're not directly in touch with the director there. I wonder whether there's a bit of maybe it's pre-started, so Chiral's technically the leader.
Well, you're making up your own stories now, Mike.
I thought that's what you did in this day. Too much old time.
We've got 3 months ahead. We've only got a few minutes left. Start with Mike. What's the thing you're most looking forward to in the race? What's the thing that intrigues you most that you want to kind of see unfold?
Well, I think it's these unknowns. So we've got a bunch of boats here where we've got clearly good sailors, motivated sailors, new designers. We've got a bunch of new things going on here that's going to be really interesting to watch. So at the competitive end of the game, that's what I'm interested in. I'm pretty confident that Chirao and Hugo Boss are going to put in stellar performances, and the thing that's going to hold them back is the unknown. So we can't do anything about that. We can't predict it. We just have to know that it's there. But the rest of these boats, that's fascinating to see how that will shape out in different weather conditions. I think the other side of it is also hearing the stories from people like Pip and Miranda, and hearing their stories of their first experience of a Vendée Globe, because I've got a feeling it will be really well told, and it will have a fresh perspective that perhaps we haven't seen.
I think you're right, and I think it's that the races within the race, as they all kind of separate into their groups and see those stories unfold, because they've become great, obviously competitors, but massive kind of a support network for each other in their little groups that they're in. and they will all speak to each other. They will communicate together, knowing that they're the only ones out there should the worst happen.
Yeah. It's a shame Jean Le Cam didn't speak more English, because he'd entertain an English audience. He's so funny.
He knows how to communicate good stories.
He knows how to communicate good stories. He's funny in the way he delivers it. It's very as a consequence, he's very popular with the French, who absolutely adore him, and you can kind of understand why his boat's so nihilistic. but I mean,
he is an icon, isn't he?
He is an icon.
It's French sailing, the French sport.
King Jean.
Yeah, they call him the King in Leroy. But yeah, that's 20 years of his life committed to Vendée Globes.
But he was around even before that. I remember Jean from Formula 40 days, being a stellar sailor. He's always been a fantastic sailor.
Well, there's Roland Jourdain, Michels, Jean Le Cam, they're all of a gang, and actually Nicolas Troussel, he's probably the next generation. Him and Armel Leclerc and Jeremy Bay all grew up together as best buddies, and they all went on to win successive Figaros.
Yeah.
So it's a really nice group of sailors coming through again. The next crowd through.
We so need to try and aspire for the same setup in the UK. I mean, if we can get a British winner of the Vendée Globe, maybe it will inspire a new generation and a new level of support. I mean, obviously, it's going to be tough times ahead economically. Sports like this, potentially are going to be the first to suffer, but I do hope not, because these sports extend you away from each other. There are plenty of good television sports, but none that tell the story,
the adventure,
and the adventure, and have the kind of depth that sailing of this type has.
It definitely helps having 9 nationalities in this edition. We haven't had this many Brits since 2008, when there were 7 of us.
Yeah.
This time there's 4, so it does help.
And great to see, for the second time, Kojiro Shiraishi, the only sailor from the Far East to have ever competed in the Vendée Globe. Good to have him back for a second campaign as well.
Super. He's good. I mean, he's got one of the best boats in the fleet. One just hopes he can utilise it. Utilise it. I mean, it's one of those Persico boats built at one of the best yards in Europe, in Italy. As we know, it's the same boat as Chorale, So
Jeremy Bay's team were very willing to share the information to help up speed into the boat and transfer that knowledge.
Yeah.
Obviously, because they've done a lot of development, so they were happy to share that initial knowledge.
Well, they'll face all sorts of emotions over the coming 3 months: frustration, elation, hunger, exhaustion. Let's not forget, though, you've talked about it, Mike and Dee, about the joy of the open seas as well. So there we have it, 33 sailors about to write the latest chapter of this legendary Vendée Globe race. And to all of them, we wish them fair winds and good luck. We will follow their stories unfold. We will follow those stories over the coming months, and you can follow the drama online. But from Mike Golding, Dee Kafari and me, Alec Wilkinson, it's au revoir.